to the ordinance in terms of bringing certain sections in compliance with state law, and also some areas that, that I wanted to go over with your attorney because they were less clearly enabled under state zoning enabling statutes. So, as an outcome of that kind of back and forth, then I've made those changes. The reason I have two is one has a red line and strikeout in it, and that's impossible to follow in the sign section, so I gave you the clean copy for when we get to that, because there was so much to do in there. So let's go through start with the one that has the red line and strikeout in it. And then I think the first change in that is on page 5. And this is a definition that I added to try to, as part of cleaning up the sign section, because as I think Steve talked with you about when he came last month, based on a Supreme Court decision, it's the sign ordinance needs to be more evenly applied to all kinds of entities and less about what's on the sign. So in a couple of places, and I've done this for a few communities, by now, taken out the term business and put entity, just because it could be a nonprofit and you can't really treat them different. So that, I'm just gonna keep going through these and expect that you'll jump in and ask questions if you have them. Or point out anything I missed going through here. Planned unit development, that was a note I had from when I met with you in the summer.
Where are you on?
Page 8, the definition of planned unit development, I added for a group of lots, because you had that in the narrative in part of the zoning that neighboring landowners could combine their lots to come talk about a PUD and make the 2 acres that way. But the definition didn't say that. So that's just to make those consistent. On page 9, the definition of sign, I think, is something that we need to talk about. We all in the planning and land use law field agree that we don't really know how this recent Supreme Court decision is going to shake out in the end. It didn't answer all the questions. It made questions. So in saying that basically the litmus test now is if you have to read a sign to decide if it's in conformance, then your regulations aren't really consistent with the concept of freedom of speech. So when we start saying a flag of a government, agency, civic, charitable, religious, patriotic, fraternal, or civil organization, that raises the question, well, you're having to read it to see if it says on it Kiwanis Club or McDonald's. So what the approach that I think we've all taken is to try to help communities make their ordinances more in conformance with the Supreme Court decision, but not necessarily completely, because there's a reasonableness in there that we think there'll be further decisions that go about this. So some communities are saying, just strike out anything about political advertising. My recommendation is to just reference the state law in that and let the state deal with the political signs and don't talk about it in yours. But it's a little muddier in the flags. I think most communities are saying sign won't include a flag of the United States or any government entity. Yours is the first place I've seen an exemption for all these other categories. So that's really, this is not a black and white thing. This is a subjective thing that you really need to to talk about and decide today and give me the direction on what you wanna do with this section. Do you wanna leave it like it is? Do you wanna take it out? Do you want it to just be governmental flags that are, because those have their own regulations too, there's a flag code that the state, adopted. So I think, you know,
There would be a distinction between a flag and a banner.
well,
I think our concern would be at least my concern would be an open thing to be able to put banners up wherever you wanted. You know,
Yeah.
and I think in that sense, we would consider a banner to be a form of a sign
and that's,
as opposed to a flag. And that's, because I know what you're
Later
saying,
on.
but not including any flag, badge, or insignia. So it would include, the regulations would include a banner. It would, that banners would be subject to, because we do have banners around town.
so one approach might be to say not including any flag, badge, or insignia,
Yeah,
but what if it's the golden arches?
well,
That's-
Flag with the golden arches.
No, I mean, that,
Or-
could you argue that's an insignia, right, on a building,
Right.
say,
Right.
So, as I said, this is, I think this could be problematic, and there are different options for it. One, that a couple communities have adopted is only exempt, the United States flag or another governmental flag, because those are subject to their own regulations.
So you could put a period after agency, governmental agency period,
Right, that would be.
and strike everything else.
And then that would be one option. But there's no doubt that under the Supreme Court decision, you can't treat religious, patriotic, fraternal different than commercial. That's really, you know, what that case was about. You could put a size limit on flags and just say none of them are signs. That would be another option that would kind of prevent abuse of that provision.
Is this unique to Waterville Valley, or, I mean, are there?
Yeah, I don't know, I don't memorize everybody's zoning, but I haven't noticed this in any that I've worked with lately.
I wonder how other.
It's more
communities
typical to
handle it.
exempt a flag for a government.
Do they specify US government or governmental agency? Or is it just?
They do until I either.
So we
So,
should not, we should not.
I wouldn't.
so it's, by highlighting this, you're saying we need to look at this, or
Yeah,
do you
this
have
is a
recommendation?
place you need to make a decision
I got you.
now.
All right,
to,
right.
to tell me what to do with this. This is yours, and I've tried to, you know,
Gotcha.
highlight anything that's not, pretty black and white in my mind.
Yeah, I would be, you know, in terms of basically saying, if you're a civic, charitable, religious, patriotic, fraternal, or similar organization, you'd have to get a permit. You know, that you're not exempted from the rules, which is what this is saying right now, right? It says you're kinda exempted.
It's saying you're
from the-
exempt, yeah.
Yeah, and I would not be exempt, I don't think we wouldn't want to exempt.
You don't think we would not want to exempt them? or
I don't
would?
think we would want to exempt them.
Put a period after agency.
Yeah, as long as governmental agency would, a school would be a governmental agency. Okay,
if it's a public school.
yeah.
So, is there consensus for that? Everybody's okay with that?
So what you're talking about is scratching the but not including.
No, just put a
No.
period after governmental agency.
Right, scratching or of any civic, charitable, religious, patriotic, fraternal, or similar organization.
I get, the only thing that I'm wondering here a little bit about is, was my understanding that a governmental, that if it's a government or governmental agency, they're exempted from all of these regulations.
No, this is
Oh,
saying
okay.
that you can have a US flag on your house without a permit, too.
Right.
This isn't exempting the entity, this is exempting
Exempting
you from
flags,
needing a
right.
permit if it's a governmental flag.
It's insignia of a governmental agency.
Oh, all right, okay, gotcha.
Cause you're right, the governmental agency is exempt anyway. But,
Right,
but this is saying, no, when we say sign, we don't mean the US flag you wanna put on your garage. But right now, it says you could put a lot of different things and be exempt from needing a permit. And I think it was trying to exempt anything that's not commercial, and that was fine prior to the recent Supreme Court's decision. All right,
So you exclude that then?
So somebody in the front of their house, instead of putting up a US flag, puts up a flag, you know how people have seasonal ones, like a spring one that says welcome spring and has flower on it or something? You know how they sell those in stores? Is that, yeah.
Yeah.
So is that against the rules?
see, that's the thing that you need to think about too, that I was gonna bring up when we get to the
to the
sign
regulations.
section, because you don't allow any residential property to have anything like that,
Yeah.
right? I mean, so you, there might be other things you want to exempt in this definition.
Would you look at doing that by size? I mean,
Yeah, that would be a great way to do it. And,
Or numbers, yeah, in struggling, because I've been doing some work on the sign thing, I'm trying to, and that's one of the questions you have, you get to right away, which is you get to a single-family residential lot. And are we going to say no signs are allowed? I mean, it's a decision we're gonna have to make, I mean,
right now, you don't.
Well, right now, we don't, yeah, that's what we
Right.
say, but we do in fact have all kinds of signs on residential lots. And it gets into the definition of what do we mean by a sign, and it gets into size, is it readable off the lot? If you have a nameplate, if you, for instance, put your nameplate down on the mailbox, is that a sign?
Typically, so
Yeah,
so
it
how
really
you,
gets-
No.
right, so
Period.
how you wanna think about that is, okay, you're saying there are a lot, and I'm saying your ordinance doesn't allow them. Which
Right.
ones do you look at and think, that's fine, and which
Yeah,
ones do
that's
you
what
look
we
at
have
and
to-
think, well, they're in violation,
Right.
and then we write this to exempt the ones you think are fine. Or require a permit, if you think they should require a permit, but be allowed with a
What you're
permit.
talking about is a decorative. I don't see it as a flag per se,
But
more of a decorative.
But they are, I mean, they sell them as flags, they replace your, US flag.
All
with-
depends what the
with all
meaning
these
of
other-
flag is,
Well,
right?
right.
And
We don't wanna go down that route,
And
but
then
I never
put
thought
a
it was a
banner on
flag.
the pole.
A banner maybe?
No, it's a banner.
Because you can have like a school, some people, put the little thing in their garden with the little school.
a kids
Banner.
crossing or
Or-
anything like that.
Yeah.
I mean,
That may be more informational.
But, I mean, if we're looking at, say, a 2x3 flag with a flower on it.
Yeah.
It seems to be this one thing, but if it's a 2x3 flag saying, okay, not to get political, Trump's the best, then that's like a sign. So how do we differentiate?
Well,
We can't
between-
touch
one way
Those you
maybe
can't
is
touch.
that
Those are
it's
fairly
not
clear,
for-
political.
Okay, well, maybe not political, but say, you
I can
know,
answer that.
Say it has something I hate
Thank
speech,
you, yes,
then,
something
then
religious.
what do you do?
yes, exactly.
But you have to look at the beginning of your definition. It
Mhm.
says any device for visual communication that's used for the purpose of bringing the subject thereof to the attention of the public.
Yeah.
Probably not a flower on a
Yeah,
banner
that's what I said,
on your
decorative.
flagpole.
Right.
Right.
Little
and
butterfly.
So you're
so-
probably alright with decorative already.
You get down to, particularly when we get to single-family lots, the whole intent of the previous thing was, we didn't want, we don't like real estate, we don't want real estate signs on every lot, you know, like this house for sale or open house. We want it to be, and the problem is you can't now, you can't no longer say, you can't have a real estate sign.
Right, let's
You know.
talk about that more when we get to the sign
Well,
section, and we can
but
come
it
back to
leads
the
all these
definition.
other ambiguities,
Yeah.
because if you, you know, if
We can-
that's the problem.
We can come back to this definition after we talk,
Yeah.
let's come back to the definition after we talk about the sign section itself. And make sure that we make any changes there we need to. So I've made some other changes in the definitions of, because of the issue we're talking about with signs. Change panel, if you can't regulate by what's on the sign, then you can't control whether it's changed or not. Informational sign, similarly, if you need to read it to see if it's legal, then your ordinance is not legal.
Did you
so-
strike that whole definition sign change now, just striking it?
Yep,
Or the whole thing, or just the after the or of any civic?
no, in signs change panel, I was striking all of that on page 9, and top of page 10, striking informational sign.
Just so it doesn't get screwed up later, the numbering would be.
The numbering has a mind of its own in this document that I
Okay.
received.
Right.
And
Yeah,
we'll
we'll
clean it
address-
all up as a
Yeah.
final step after town meeting.
I'm
It
thinking
would
that
take half a day.
sign change panel. I'm thinking where the comma is now, put a period and get rid of the back half. But a sign permitted to permit immediate change or copy is I mean, it just defines
But you're not
what
gonna
it
be
is.
able to regulate it differently than any other sign. You're not gonna need that definition.
Well, other than you could say on a lot, on this type of property, you are allowed to have a change panel sign, or you are not allowed to have
No.
a change panel. Why can't you say that? Why can't you say?
How do you know if they changed it without reading it?
No, I'm not saying that they changed it or anything else, I'm just saying you
What's
cannot
the
build or construct that type of sign.
What's the significance of a change panel sign if you can't
Well,
regulate by
What
what's
about,
content?
what if we wanted to refer to the size? I mean, if we wanted to regulate the size of a change panel sign, wouldn't we have to define it?
Well, I think the idea is to stay away from the plastic, you know, with letters missing or somebody going up and vandalizing it and
Like we get.
putting swear words
Yeah.
Yeah,
on it.
and-
No, but that, I think that's what, it's not the content,
Right.
not trying to legislate the content of it. It is just having that type of sign everywhere. Is I think, right, Bill, what you're talking about?
Well,
Or choosing
you're-
whether
you're-
that
you're
goes
into
on.
a whole- You're into another area which is saying we're not going to allow those types of signs, period.
Which you can do, right? As long as it's consistent.
Well, we could make a statement, you know, you can't use plastic temporary lettering or something.
Well, except, I mean,
I mean-
again, we'll talk about that more when we get to the
Okay.
sign section, but right now you have something saying that the select board has to think it looks okay and fits in. So, I mean, you can add more detail there about which kinds of signs are okay and which aren't in that section. And so I'd mark that. Informational I would strike because again, if you're having to read the sign, then it's not an ordinance that would be upheld.
But I thought we would want to define it because there again, aren't we looking to regulate the sizes like on trails and whatnot? So wouldn't we need a definition if we're trying to establish sizes for them?
What you can say is, certain uses certain kinds of properties, certain land uses can be associated with certain size of signs, but you can't regulate the size differently according to what's on the sign or not. That's the problem now. That's why this is,
Well,
it's making
isn't
work
that-
for
isn't that
everybody, but it is
Purpose,
what it
though?
is.
Isn't an informational sign a purpose
Yeah.
as opposed to, I mean, the purpose is to direct somebody somewhere.
You know, the guidance on this with the Supreme Court decision is every community has to find the place that they're comfortable with, and there's gonna be gray areas. So, you want to lean toward having a lot of these things, and, that's your decision.
But without reading a sign, couldn't you say, if the purpose is for putting something up for sale, you know, we don't like that kind of sign, but if the purpose is to direct somebody somewhere, that sign's okay. And couldn't you define it that way without having to read the sign?
Safety.
Or for safety signs, something like that? I mean, if you
But
could
the-
define the purpose, then at least you got some sort of control.
Well, you know, it makes common sense, and in my opinion, it would be fine to do that and see what happens. In a strict interpretation of the Reed case, no, because how do you know whether it's saying come to McDonald's or the parking lot is this way
By
without
definition-
reading it?
By definition, when the person comes to get permission to put the sign up, what's the purpose of the sign?
If you don't know a strict definition, if you don't know it's in compliance with the Reed case without reading the contents of the sign, then it's not considered to be in strict compliance with Reed. In real life, it's gonna be really tough for communities to be in strict compliance with that decision, and that's why we think we'll see it, you know, further decisions.
Which again, to me, argues to some extent of moving cautiously in this area. I realize we're not in full compliance with the Reed decision, but then again, 90% of the towns are.
Right, so the
Right.
goal is to get, the
You
goal
know,
is to
try
get
do
in
this
more,
right,
the goal is
not
to get in
do
more
this quick.
compliance and find the place that you're comfortable with.
Yeah,
With the expectation that we may end up changing it further,
well,
based on further
there's no,
legal interpretations.
it's not like somebody's suing us or somebody's
Right.
screaming, you know, you're, you know, why, you know,
So we should
Try
work
to
towards
take
the
your
general
time
here now,
to
right?
do
I
this
mean,
right,
something-
rather than,
Yeah.
you know, moving right towards the next town meeting and change something and, I don't,
So it's just something general now that's moving us in the right direction.
yeah, right.
So what you're suggesting is leave the definitions the way they are right now, and then go, when we get to the sign, portion?
I think we should work on this. I don't think it's just in my opinion, something we should try to push to get to this year's town meeting. Because we've got dates facing us that say we'd have to make decisions at this meeting almost to do that. And I don't see the reason to move that quickly.
This is actually why I was reluctant to, as Mark knows, to
Yeah.
agree to write your zoning ordinances for this town meeting this fall,
Oh,
unless you were willing to have an additional meeting
Right.
last month
yeah,
to have this conversation with me, because, I mean, at this point, you've paid me to write amendments that you don't
Sure.
necessarily want, based on, you know, a very general discussion we had in the summer and some input from Steve.
no, but it might be
And
useful in the discussions that we
it-
do have.
It's a much more efficient process, and everybody's use of time, to have the more general discussion, and then I go write it and say, is this what you meant? Rather than kinda guessing based on really general discussion and some input from your attorney. So, but at this point, I'm happy to undo changes and get, you know, as close as I can, on these issues. But it didn't touch any of the parking and density and those kind of conversations that we had, you know, in the summer, because that just really needs some discussion like this to find out what's gonna make sense. And that it's my job to put the words to it. It's not mine to kind of grab them out of thin air, but to facilitate a conversation to understand what you want and then put the words to that. So, so I'm not trying to tell you what direction to go with the sign ordinance. This was my best guess from the
Right.
input that I
Yeah.
had from our earlier conversation and from your attorney. It's, you know, just, I think that by making some changes in response to the Reed decision, you show the good faith of that you recognize that, and certainly a court would look at that as well. The definition of sign off premises, I just tried to clean up a little bit. That wasn't so clear.
Is the red's a strikeout, is the blue an addition?
Yeah. And I expanded some on your definition of temporary sign. And I thought the word variance just didn't really add to that. I would take that out. And I would take out the word advertising, because that's a more clear violation of the Reed definition. The next, down with two-family residential unit, the changes I made there, you explained last time that your two-family residential unit is kind of like an accessory dwelling unit. And one of the things that we talked about making sure that you come into compliance with is the new accessory dwelling unit law that the state passed. So I proposed a couple of just tweaks to what you already had in there for two-family residential unit. My next step after today will be to make any changes that you tell me, you know, now, and then run the specific language by Steve, by your attorney. So my next step on that would be to ask him, does he agree that if we just tweak your two-family residential unit section, then you're in compliance with the accessory dwelling unit law? He may say to change the name, he may have other input, but that was my sense, that the state law with the accessory dwelling unit law that was passed requires an interior door between the two units. So that's why I added that language. On the top of page 11, I think it would preclude town involvement in what the lease agreement is. I think land use law now actually would preclude that. But that's not a municipal issue. And then the next change you come to is related to the accessory dwelling unit law as well.
What page is this?
And this would be the middle of page 12.
Okay, thank you.
Bill, can I ask you, before we move on, that kind of bothered me, line, 85, the sign off premises. I guess I'm just not comfortable with a sign located on a different lot as being like a complete definition of what that means.
Yeah, did I
Different
take
than
out
what?
too much?
Well, different than what? Like,
Yeah.
And the business, yeah, okay, good. Well, do you have some specific wording in mind? I see that that's too short.
well, we don't wanna use the word business, right?
Entity might be,
Then the entity, it's, then the content, it's, or then it's content.
see, that's one of those questions hanging out there after the Reed decision is, well, how do we regulate off-premises signs now?
Well, what
Because
about-
you have to
You
read
gotta
that
read the
to see.
content to
Yep,
see
right.
if it's on that law.
So we're all still kind of acting as if it's okay.
Just
Oh,
saying.
but it's not okay to,
Yeah.
about it,
Oh,
say
but you
anything
can't
about its
read the
content.
sign.
You could.
Then its owner?
You can
Then the
do it
entity
without
that
reading the
erected it.
content.
Yeah, then the entity
How
that
can you do
erected
that?
it. That's
Well,
good.
somebody would come in with an application and say, look, I'm a business here. I want to erect a 3x3 off-premise sign made out of these materials, blah, blah, blah. I'm not gonna show you what's written on the front of it, but that's what I wanna do.
What if we say
And
that
then we would have
activity,
to
Okay,
say you are or are not allowed, right?
right, okay.
a sign
That's good.
located on a different lot than the activity on which it is located, would that work?
On an entity,
Facility.
facility.
Yeah, well, actually, I like the activity, because what if it's a sign for multiple businesses and maybe it's off premise?
Or I was thinking about like the resort
Not
itself
necessarily.
owns a bunch of different lots, so that could be, the entity could own a lot of different
Yeah.
lots.
Yeah,
See if it's
facility that is, okay, that's good.
You'll get another crack at all of the wording that comes out of today's meeting
Right.
at the December meeting.
Okay. Thanks.
So middle of page 12, the, I would suggest, this is one of the pieces that I wanted to run by your town attorney and see if he agrees, brings this into compliance in the accessory dwelling unit statute, because you can't limit the minimum size of an accessory dwelling unit to smaller than 750 square feet. You can limit the percentage it is of the principal dwelling unit, and that comes out to more than 2,000 square feet, right? It comes out to 2,250 feet. If you take your minimum dwelling unit of 1,500 square feet, 50% of that, 750. So those numbers just don't all make the math come out right to be in compliance with the ordinance. Maybe another way to achieve it rather than striking that, but this is one way. Because in a way, then you're saying it can only be 500 square feet.
This is on, again, we're back to page 12 now?
The middle of page 12, yeah.
I think B3 was the primary, so the 50% was the secondary dwelling.
Yeah.
The 2,000 square feet, wasn't that the primary dwelling in a two?
That the way
Family
it
residential unit?
reads, it's the whole building.
Oh, okay, well,
Because it says the minimum habitable floor area of a two-family residential unit should be 2,000 square feet.
when we've been looking at it, we've always looked at the 2,000 square feet as the primary.
Yeah,
dwelling.
that's not what it says.
No, but that's the way it's been interpreted here.
But are you
Maybe.
saying then that it starts with 2,000 square feet and you can make part of that B?
No, you have a primary dwelling that has to be 2,000 square feet, and then the minimum size of the secondary dwelling has to be 1,000 square feet. It has to be 50% of that 2,000. That's the way we've interpreted it. Might not be written that way, but
So to bring this into compliance with the accessory dwelling unit law, I think you would want to strike what I did,
Yeah.
because the law is saying you have to allow an accessory dwelling unit on any single family dwelling.
Okay.
You wouldn't be able to require it to be bigger. Again, there may be another way to bring it in compliance, but this seems to be the simplest.
You see, it's interesting, Mark, I'm reading that floor area 3, I would have interpreted it to be the inverse, that the minimum size of the whole dwelling would be 2,000 square feet.
That's what this says.
That's what she's
Yeah,
saying.
that's
You
what
haven't
that
been
clearly
interpreting it
says.
right.
And you're saying that's a problem?
You haven't been interpreting it right. That's a problem.
Oh, okay.
And it's
All right.
it's a problem that if you want to use this to come into compliance with the accessory dwelling unit law, then you
Right.
need to strike this, because you need to allow an accessory dwelling unit now under state law with any single family dwelling. You wouldn't be able to require it to be bigger.
But I thought later on, when we get to I have to read it again. I thought LDR uses by right.
think you allow this anywhere you allow single family, so,
Yeah, I
That-
think we do.
so that already works, if you wanna call this accessory dwelling unit.
We just have to allow it
Is,
no matter
is the
how
problem that
small.
we're using the wrong
Right.
words here, though? That's what I'm confused. Should we be saying, we call it a two-family residential unit.
Yeah, I'm
That's the
gonna-
same thing as an accessory unit.
Yeah, I'm gonna
What's
ask-
the difference?
That's a question I'll have for your town attorney is,
I-
does that matter, should they change the name, or is this okay? If it,
Talking about the word unit? How it's used?
do you need to call it a single family dwelling unit with an accessory dwelling unit? Or are you okay calling it a two-family residential unit? A quick
Oh.
fix that I would bounce off him is just adding the term accessory dwelling unit in the definitions, back in the definitions.
Because I thought here's my train. By uses by right, we say in LDR, you're allowed to have a two-family residential unit. And a two-family residential unit, we're saying it's gotta be a minimum of 2,000 square feet, and the second unit can be no more than 50% of the total square footage. I thought right away we were in compliance with the law. We're allowing them.
No, you have to allow them in any single-family dwelling now. Even
Right,
if
but
it's,
isn't that what this does?
you
Allows
don't
them?
allow them if it's 1,500 square feet.
Right. You gotta
I
allow
thought-
it even in smaller.
Oh, you said, that's the issue.
Every single-family home is entitled now to have an accessory dwelling unit. Even my 1,200 square foot home, if it was here.
Okay.
Bill, did you have something?
Is there a place in here that deals with a two-family home? We have multifamily
Yes.
units that are three or more.
Yeah,
We have single, but.
different category.
Oh, okay, I missed that. I couldn't find duplex or
That's where I was confused
two-family
the
anywhere.
first time I came. You have to look in dwelling unit, two-family, dwelling two-family on page 5. And that's different, that's just a duplex, but it was explained to me that this two-family residential is more like an accessory dwelling. So I thought, well, rather than add accessory dwelling units, why don't we just make it even more like accessory dwelling? It'd be simpler.
So we just have to remember that two-family residential unit means a different thing than dwelling two-family.
I think that,
That's confusing.
I think,
Well, that's what I told you in August, that this is confusing, why do you have it this way?
I don't think you
I
can
didn't
call it
understand
a-
what it was.
yeah, I don't think you can call it a two-family dwelling unit as a single thing, because
Yeah, it's
the
always
way the
right.
unit is defined here, there'd be two units in a single-family,
Yeah,
two-unit building.
so,
You can't call it a unit.
so what I was trying to, I had trouble following it, but I did, learn last time I met with you that when you say two-family residential unit, you mean a residential unit with an accessory dwelling in it.
Right.
Well, why don't we just say that?
That would be great.
That's what she,
Yeah,
I
why
would-
don't we say,
That's
I'd
always
be
been my
happy to do that
interpretation of
too.
what we
So much
meant by
clearer, yeah.
two-family.
because this
Was-
confused me too.
yeah. So we'll just
So it
change
wasn't
the
just me,
column.
that's great.
No.
So this is referring to a nanny suite kind of thing in a house?
Yeah,
Yes,
yeah,
Okay.
that basically, we've always allowed them.
Yeah, it'd be so much clearer to just say it that way.
I'm all on board with that. So
Is there an official name?
I'll do that throughout. It would be a single-family dwelling with an accessory dwelling unit,
For grandma
Right,
suite.
that's,
so I can clean that up, no problem.
Yeah.
I'm wondering whether we could then say, why on floor area under 2, why we don't say the minimum floor area of the principal dwelling unit shall be 1,500 square feet?
Because we can't regulate that, right?
Well, you can. I think you can.
You
As long as
write,
we allow the accessory, as long as we said the principal has gotta be at least 1,500
Well,
square feet.
you already do that. You require a minimum floor area for any single family dwelling to be 1,500
Yeah,
square feet.
but you're objecting to the 1,500, you're saying within that 1,500, we then have to allow the secondary unit.
No, I'm not. I'm saying that you can't say,
Oh,
sorry, you can't have an accessory dwelling unit because you're 15, not 2,000.
well, hold on a minute. If someone had built a 1,500 square foot home and now wants to add an accessory unit to it, would they be allowed to or not?
Add
Yeah.
or include in it?
Add, yes.
They'd be allowed to, they have to be, we have to allow them to do
So,
Right.
so then the principal building would be under 1,500 square feet,
Right,
the principal dwelling unit
it. Would be
right.
1,500 square feet.
If we
would be
strike,
under,
Why would it be
because you created the secondary.
within it? Are you
Within
saying,
it.
are you saying
That's why I said add or
create
in.
within? So are you
Well-
adding like constructing on or adding
You
dividing
said
on?
add, are you saying creating it inside?
Adding within. If you add within, can you add, if somebody has a 1,500 square foot home and wants to add within now a unit,
not under your
secondary-
zoning,
Okay.
and that's okay,
it's not been challenged in,
all right.
in this community, is my understanding. It's, some communities consider it okay and some don't. It's, you know, that's kind of a question of as long as your town attorney is comfortable defending it.
So as long as we set what our minimum is, then anyone can add on to whatever that minimum is, but we can't say that it has to be more to add on to.
Right.
Right.
You can't treat different single-family dwellings differently in terms of whether they can have an accessory dwelling unit or not.
An accessory dwelling unit is an additional construction to the primary. Do we have that defined?
Except if it already was 2,000 square feet, you could make a
Right.
500 square foot apartment within it
Gotcha.
under your ordinance.
This doesn't seem to address the trending, environmental friendly, small, tiny homes that are becoming popular now.
Well, we could, if we would like to say that you're allowed to build a smaller home, that's another area, that's a whole nother
Yeah.
discussion.
I mean, that's become.
But we clearly do state right now that you're not
Yeah, right.
supposed to build a little tiny home.
Not likely. You're gonna build a small home on an expensive lot, but I mean, they are trending.
Does it have wheels on it?
Not allowed.
Tiny 500 square foot houses.
Most communities, just so you know, don't have a minimum floor area
Yeah.
at all. They just leave that to building and safety codes. But some do. You're certainly not the only one, but the majority don't interpret zoning that way. The change I made throughout, that we don't really need to go over to each page, is anywhere you talked about a different setback for land belonging to the United States government. Steve and I agreed that you can't really regulate based on ownership, so we would change that everywhere to designate it as the White Mountain National Forest, because in that way you're talking about a use rather than an owner. I know it's a technicality, but that's what we were asked to do, so that
Right.
throughout. Page 23, this was kind of a question, but I wasn't sure exactly what you were trying to do on antennas and satellite dishes, and it wasn't clear from my notes from the last meeting, but you can't require site plan review unless it's associated with a non-residential or multifamily use. So I added that. But my question was if you want it to be considered a building or structure that needs a permit, then we would change that in the definitions. And I wasn't sure what your intent was there, which way.
I didn't quite understand the last thing you said. If you wanna have the antennas,
Were you trying to say if my non-residential or multifamily use adds an antenna or satellite dish, I need to come back to amend my site plan? Or were you trying to say if DirecTV comes and puts one on my roof, I need a building permit or a zoning permit? Which did you want?
Well, let's back up, because this thing was something that came up 5 years ago,
Yeah.
when there was an argument that we cannot in fact regulate satellite dishes, because they're
Right.
governed by the federal government says if somebody wants to put a DirecTV dish up, he has a right to do that,
No matter what.
period.
Right.
And you can't write any regulations that
That's
prohibit
right.
those. Now, that was our understanding, I could be wrong, but that's where we got
That's
to
what we
some
were
of this
told,
convoluted word.
What
The
about
FCC
setbacks?
The FCC controls it.
The
and we're not
FCC
allowed-
controls it, and we're not
We're not
allowed to
allowed
touch
to
it.
do anything. Because we had regulations that prohibited them from being above the roof line,
Right,
all kinds
and
of
they've
things.
said, no, they're
and they
not, you
said
can't
no.
do that.
Can't do it.
What about setbacks?
Well, I don't think we could even do the setbacks because sometimes you have to locate them so they can get
Mhm.
the signal, and you can't legislate somebody not being able to get the signal.
It's common to do that, but I can see how it could be interpreted as interfering with communications.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's what we
Yeah,
were
I
told.
see that.
that seems a little
couldn't
loose,
do
cause you
that.
could put it on your neighbor's property. If you.
Well,
No, I
no,
don't
it
know
has
if
to
it
be
goes
on
that
your
far,
property,
I
but-
don't know what the regulations
But within the
say.
setbacks and stuff, I don't think we could do that either.
But it
Makes
did
sense.
get to, because we live in the woods, that you can't, sometimes gotta get these things up to get them to pick up a satellite, you know?
So is this on every building, like condo associations and
Any
single family?
Condo associations can't legislate them either.
They can't, they
They
cannot.
cannot, right, that's
dictate
our
their own
understanding,
law,
is they
right?
can't, right, you know.
They
Well,
can't,
you know,
it
right.
can't even be part of your condo docs or anything. That's what started the whole thing
all right,
was
good, okay.
condominiums tried to do it and then tried to get us to do it. When we looked into it, nobody can.
So Mark, do you
Keep
wanna take this whole paragraph out?
No,
Does that come out as an accessory use then?
Well, it's up to the board, but
Is that what your recommendation would be based on your understanding of the FCC guidance?
well, now, we specifically talked about antennas as it relates to DirecTV. Satellite dishes, I don't know, satellite dishes were, nobody uses them anymore.
Well, the DirecTV antenna is a little satellite dish.
yeah,
Well,
the
It is a little
Right,
satellite dish.
But I think the intent of this was the big satellite
the
dishes.
big,
I don't
yeah.
think
The
so.
big
And
communication.
those don't
Communication.
exist unless you're a TV or radio
Right.
station.
Right,
Right.
and.
But you
and-
could have one.
Yeah,
You could.
And I would like, I would opt to leave it in, that, you wanna put up a big dish like that, it is subject to, it's gonna be all this is saying is it's gonna be considered as an accessory use and subject to site plan review.
And the words that I added were to make that consistent with what you can do with site plan review.
Right, well, I don't have any disagreement with that.
That it would just,
Obviously, a single-family home would not be subject to site plan review.
right, so it's just kinda clarifying language I was trying to put in.
Sure.
So you're agreeing with that?
And we still do hold public hearings on like antennas for telecommunications and that sort of thing.
Right.
So we still do, those have to fall within the setbacks
Right.
and we can control those. But, yeah, so I'd leave it there.
So the next,
But I would, with the addition, we're leaving the
fine.
addition.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Okay.
It just clarifies
Yeah.
what
Okay.
we've always said.
so the next kinda discussion point was up on, top of page 24. like this was in my notes, that I brought up last time when I just kinda quickly went through some questions. You say earlier, or somewhere else in the ordinance, that home occupation should not change the residential character. And I'm wondering if you wanna have this parking space requirement if they weren't having any deliveries or customers, or do you want them to have it if they don't really need it?
No, and I would completely agree with you. I think we probably need to add a line that says a home occupation that involves either customers or deliveries or something of that nature shall provide additional off-street parking. But if you don't have any of those things, if you just telecommuting, why would we wanna require additional parking?
Yeah, well, that's my question, because right now you make them have one parking space for each 200 square feet of floor area. And that just seems like it's pushing it
Yeah.
to
Right.
violate the residential character needlessly in some cases.
Yeah.
Everyone's drawing the shades and they don't know that you're doing work.
Well, you
Terry.
know, that's a,
Just at home on their computer.
that's a really first cut at zoning amendments is, you know, what is not getting enforced, get it out of your ordinance.
So just add a home occupation that involves deliveries or customers shall provide additional off-street parking.
Throw the whole thing away.
As appropriate, or,
Yeah.
Make my life.
And do we not mandate how many spaces per 200 square feet, just strike that last bit?
I think that,
I'm fine with as appropriate. The 200 square feet becomes I mean, I don't know whether we have to do it. The 200 square feet becomes that we end up with the stupid stuff. I got a 600 square foot
Yeah.
temporary office, I've gotta have 3 parking spaces. Well, maybe you don't. Maybe you just have a customer, you know, periodically, once every 2 weeks, you just need 1 space.
why
Right.
not?
why couldn't
If your point really is no on-street parking, that if they're gonna have
Right.
vehicles coming, they need off-street parking, then maybe you could even put in a sentence that emphasizes that and says no on-street parking.
Right.
As
Why couldn't you
appropriate.
put it in the schedule of off-street parking with the other requirements so that it's subject to the whim of the board? I mean, this is a guideline rather than a strict requirement. If you put it in the guideline table,
Are they supposed to come for site plan review?
well,
Cause I don't know when you would implement that otherwise. That's
Not
why I
a
would put in,
single family, not a single
Yeah.
family or a two-family residence, they do not come for site plan review.
no, but if you refer to the table in this H, if you refer to the table, is what I'm saying. Right now, because it's a zoning ordinance, you don't have any flexibility right here.
It's taking the flexibility out of the
Yeah.
table, if you notice, on the next page.
well, you couldn't
they
do
put it
anything
in.
in that table, but in a home occupation, so I'm not sure that would.
Oh, you mean she did, I haven't looked at this. I don't know, maybe. She stripped us of there,
This is a work discussion.
yeah. Well, perhaps that leads to the next thing, to the discussion of that table. I don't, when the parking requirements are kind of trickled here and there throughout the ordinance, I don't think it's a good way to do it. I think the parking requirements should be in a table. I like the idea of having it in a table, and these paragraphs can refer to that table. But when you sprinkle them in amongst all the requirements, they're hard to keep track of.
Well,
So
and there's
then
no
maybe the thing to
flexibility.
do is add in the table that you'd say as appropriate, or?
Well, I would, I'm not trying to tell you how to do the language, but I would say in paragraph H, that it would say parking referred to, parking requirements as listed in schedule of off-street parking, and then add another line item in that off-street parking, and then it kind of fits in with all the other off-street parking requirements, and also gives us the flexibility, which you seem to have taken away from us.
instead of calling it a schedule of off-street parking, call it guidelines for off-street parking. That way, you guys, that's where you, that's the starting point. And then if the restaurant is gonna be open longer than you know, for whatever reason, or you feel there's gonna be more people there, you can adjust it, and vice versa.
Well, let's go there, so we're all on the same page. So page 26, you didn't have anything in restaurants and bars, and I was asked to make a suggestion there. And the typical requirement is 1 space for every 75 square feet of gross floor area, and I'm not really sure how that, I hadn't seen primary floor area used before, and I'm not an expert on parking requirements, I mean, other than looking at 10 other ordinances and saying, well, this looks typical. It was last reviewed by somebody who's been in that business, so 1 space for every 75 square feet makes more sense than per seat, because they don't always know the number of seats when they apply for the permit. I didn't take your flexibility away. I put it on the applicant if they want a reduction to show you a technically adequate parking analysis. You're the judge of whether it's technically adequate.
Yeah, but you took away the ability to decrease.
Well, not really. I just said 2 different thoughts. You can increase it because their use is just different, and you know that, and you say no. In your case, we're gonna ask for more. They can ask for a reduction, but accompany that with what's in your opinion a technically adequate parking analysis. So, you know, that makes it so somebody's not coming in asking you for less parking, but not showing you why. So it's trying to separate those thoughts that you can increase it of your, because that's necessary in your judgment. But if they want it decreased, then they need to show you why. And I think if you weren't looking at the red line strikeout, you wouldn't feel like this was taking decrease away. You'd see it as 2 different thoughts.
Yeah.
Well, just like the example we just had of the home business.
Right.
So if I'm a telecommuting attorney and no one ever comes to my house, maybe I come into you and you say, okay, you have a 600 square foot house, you owe us 2 parking spots, and I show you my business and say I need 0, and you say okay.
So that's a
Right.
technically adequate parking analysis?
Well, you know what I mean.
I know what you mean, but that's what
No,
it
but I
says
mean,
here.
we'll
Show you
do a,
that
no, we're saying, here's my business,
I know, but what this says is, in order for you to do that,
right?
It is
you've gotta provide a
adequate
technically
It
adequate.
technically is adequate. I've
Parking
shown you my
analysis.
business
It needs
plan
no
and
technical
you
to
guys
be-
say you don't have anybody come to the house.
But
All your business is in Timbuktu.
I didn't think the consensus was to leave that parking requirement for home occupations in.
Well,
But-
I
but to
just
say
used
as
that an
appropriate,
example,
so
sorry, bad example.
Just want to make sure I got that. So,
Yeah.
Bill?
We've been kicking around parking for a while.
Yeah,
15
And as you look at this, you know, every one of these requirements is either arbitrary or we have no idea where the original number came from. And I think there's a need to better define what the required parking spaces are, and it's gonna relate to what you originally asked Tara to do, which was figure out how to increase density in the C1 zone. And so my suggestion would be that the planning board really needs to authorize a technical parking analysis for all of these different units, different types of uses, so that we know what we're talking about, so that developers have some idea of what they need to plan for when they come in. And to put that burden on the developer for every one of these different uses. You know, if you're doing a comprehensive development, or if there's a restaurant coming in, or if you're just trying to figure out what changes in town square, how that impacts parking. It just seems to me that the town needs to do a better job in determining the parameters of parking, rather than say, well, if you think it ought to be less, you give us a technically adequate analysis or evaluation.
Well, I think the plan for looking at the parking requirements and how it hangs together and looking at more flexibility and shared parking and all is kind of my understanding was that's kind of phase 2, that we were just trying to do some quick cleanup that could be done for the coming meeting. And then, the plan is that I'd work with the planning board, after that.
I'm not sure,
Following.
however, though, as Bill said, that those numbers are arbitrary. They may have had some.
Oh, I'm sure they did.
Right, but they'll be
If they've been here
reviewed,
since 1968,
they'll be
you know, are they
reviewed
still
as part of the
applicable?
next
Who
phase
knows?
of the amendments. But yeah, I was just trying to do some things that could be done quickly. And I had a question highlighted in here. I don't really know who implements this, because in B4, it was the selectmen, but then this table referenced the planning board. How's it working now? Who, not is it working well or not, but who does it go to?
Historically, it's come to the planning board, not the selectmen.
When they're initially developed,
When
right?
they're
But when it
initially
comes to
developed.
like review, say, I mean,
Well, no, the whole issue with the skateboard park and the parking lot, the parking spaces that were being used for that, that's always come in here, it's not
Right.
come to the selectmen.
But so what does this mean on bottom page 24, this B4? Selectmen have the authority to determine their parking requirement. Why would that be the selectmen? I asked Steve a couple of these things that refer to the selectmen, and he said that was fine. But this one's an inconsistency of saying the selectmen one place and planning board another.
We have not historically done that.
Okay,
We haven't come to the selectmen for parking space approval. It's always been in here, right?
I'm gonna look at how to fix that quickly with as part of these changes, just to bring this in the
well,
consistency.
the enforcement of the parking regulations, I think, you're asking me, I don't know, but
No.
is a zoning issue, and the selectmen are charged with enforcing zoning, not planning board. So
The
I thought that's
enforcement,
why they were in
well,
there.
the enforcement of it, maintenance of the lot and other things are selectmen driven.
Right, so that means the planning board said you need 20
Specific
spaces.
requirements.
Right.
The select board enforced that, but the select board typically wouldn't be the one to decide how many spaces. If
Right,
you
that's
change
what
the
I'm saying. The
uses,
selectmen have never
that's
decided
an
how
amendment
many
to the site plan.
Yeah, but
spaces
this
have
says
been.
selectmen pending review of site and operational plans by the planning board. It almost sounds like it goes before the planning board first. The planning board says 20 parking spaces, and then, but we have to go to the selectmen. to
Yeah.
do
Yeah,
that.
and
I'm
that's
gonna-
not the way we've done
I'm
it.
gonna clean that up. That's,
Yeah,
I think Steve thought you were doing it that way and said that's fine, but I had a question to him on that. Okay. Still on page 26, I would just add pursuant to RSA 155E, because that's, all the details on the excavation.
I just wanted to ask one
Requirement?
question on that table, while we're still on that table. Go back on 25, the bottom line, it says the public accommodations, hotels, motels, lodges. Is that correct? 1 to 1 1/8 spaces for each rental unit? I mean, they seem to give you a very
That
small,
seemed to be what was in there, but
yeah,
I'm
that's, that's what was in there.
that seems strange. I mean, is it 1 or is it 1 1/8?
Well, no.
That's just
Up
giving
to.
you flexibility, right?
Right.
Isn't that-
The
That's a
1
lot of
1/8
flexibility.
means that every 8 accommodations, rooms, you would need a second parking spot.
Well,
Or not.
Well, or
Yeah.
not, yeah, and because it gives you that, it says 1 to 1 1/8.
Again, because you get to review, you get to determine, so you can say, but you couldn't go below that number.
Okay.
Page 27, in, now we will shortly skip to the other section, but here, I just added some clarifying language about what's a sign, and I added, that are freestanding, placed on any part of any building or in a window. It just wasn't really clear.
You know it's bad when you go to a fourth color.
And I added clarifying language that these regulations apply in all districts.
Oh, and there's 4 colors.
Is that court decision?
We talked 10 minutes about why you Lucky you. So every time I see you, I read it. Right.
Yeah, but there are gonna be more decisions. These things are gonna go ahead.
Nothing personal.
Believe me, I've heard it before.
So we lost our audience.
Yeah. Sorry.
Because we're afraid of what's coming in.
Yeah, we saw, we just turned the page.
Yeah. So, before we go to the clean version, let's just stay with the red line strikeout another minute. The top of page 28 is just some clarifying language that the regulations apply in all districts, because they don't seem to vary. And some of the permit requirements, just clarifying language. Just because it didn't really give how the selectmen decide whether to issue the permit. That was something that Steve mentioned. In lighting, do you allow internally lit signs?
Yes.
Yes?
Well, we have them.
Yeah, we do.
We have them.
That was
Who
good.
do we allow?
That was quite a discussion.
We have them.
Do you, well, I wasn't
We
clear.
wanna have them.
Do you wanna have them? It's just, I wouldn't really know from reading this whether it's
Well,
okay. I just wanna clarify whether they're
There were
allowed or not.
complications, because it came down to the places in the town square, you didn't wanna give them an advantage over, like, Wild Coyote. And the Wild Coyote had this internal neon sign, and wasn't supposed to be good looking, but we were allowing them in town square. So it became quite a discussion. I don't think it ever really got resolved well.
Well, we've got even big signs. Isn't the Valley Inn sign lit? Isn't that big plastic panel sign a lit sign? I think it's got internal lighting in it.
Huh?
I don't know if they ever turn it on, but
Yeah, I don't know if that's uplighting or if it's.
no, it's not. I don't think it's uplit. I
Yeah.
think it's actually.
Yeah, maybe.
Internal.
Inside the
Internal.
sign, I think he's right.
Can you just
You're
say
saying,
no
Tara,
neon?
we should be affirmative one way or the other.
Can't.
Cause you gotta look at it.
Tara,
Yeah,
we should be
You
affirmative
know,
one way or the other.
right, I just wouldn't be sure looking at this. if
So,
it was-
so
I'd be careful about it.
so that requires a decision on whether we will continue to allow internal lighting or not. And then make the change to reflect it in here.
And the other one that's always been on here is we can never come up with a reason of why do we ban a gooseneck?
Yeah.
To me,
I was curious
it's
about
not
that.
an it literally keeps the light down at the
Right.
sign, right?
Yeah,
So
You can take it out.
I think we ought to take it out. Why we don't allow a gooseneck light fixture, right?
Well, I think that all falls under the category of the the sign situation too, you know. I mean, that's gonna be a discussion coming up,
Right.
and, you know, should we be making those decisions now based on what we, you know, trying to get it into this year's change, or
Oh, I don't,
put it
yeah,
off?
I wouldn't advocate trying to change any of this
Yeah.
for this year's,
Does the gooseneck signs have anything to do with the dark sky ordinance?
but isn't that the purpose of the fixture, is to,
It's
make sure the
down.
light goes down?
I'm not sure. I think it's tied into that dark
No,
sky.
The gooseneck lighting
Was an
predates
aesthetic.
any dark
Yeah.
sky stuff, and it goes
Yeah.
back
Yeah.
into when this thing was first formed, and the gooseneck lighting at that, in the early seventies was just it was a very ugly.
It was
white
ugly,
light
is
sign.
that what, it
It-
was,
it
the
was an
objection was
aesthetic thing,
the
yeah.
aesthetic?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
that
And
makes
I,
sense.
and I think that's all changed, you know, substantially.
Right, yeah, now they're considered to look pretty good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree, you know, the problem is that that's 1930s lighting, and they
Yeah.
probably figured we want a 1960s look here.
Yeah.
So, were we taking that out?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think we should take it out, because they're pretty common again now.
And really, you're talking about other type of lighting in that sentence anyway.
Right.
Flashing, blinking, blinking, rotating light. It's not gooseneck. Someone had a thing against gooseneck lighting.
In the next thing that's in the middle of the conditional use permit section is really just clarifying language. It said the light is not directed toward residential or buildings on adjacent property. And I just thought it was clearer to say the light will not illuminate any residential buildings on another lot. I think that's easier to enforce
Sure.
than directed toward. And then the next
Well,
big thing.
is that really true though? I mean, you could be off at a distance far enough so that it wasn't really illuminating the property, but that, if that light is shining right directly at a residence or something, right into the window, I mean, wouldn't that be still offensive?
Is this a point at which we need to figure out how many lumens are appropriate for not casting light beyond X number of feet from the sign, from the, wherever the light source is?
Who
I'm
gets
not
to
good
measure
with that, but isn't that how it's defined now?
I don't know, but I know that I've had people, when we used to live at One Valley Place, stay at our place and see the ski area light
Right.
and say, this is shining right in the window, and it was
Right.
offensive to them, you know, so but it certainly wasn't illuminating our property.
So maybe
I
it's
got the
two
same
different
thing.
thoughts and you wanna leave that in too. It will not illuminate or be directed toward.
Right.
Yeah.
People pay extra to see skis, ski areas.
I,
Like that.
there's a place about a
Parking lot.
mile from mine that has a light that shines in my eyes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Alright, so that be an either or. The next thing that looks like a big change, if you look carefully, you'll see I just moved this planning board review up to be
The blue.
part of this conditional use permit section. It was in here as a different thought. And I just thought it was cleaner. So it should be green, cause things that were moved, I don't know. But that's just moved up to be part of the conditional use permit process.
Yeah, just moved and rewritten, so basically.
Right, so take a minute to read that, and then we should probably switch to the clean version, because the next page is gonna be too hard to follow.
But it's, again,
And
it's
these are
specifically
top and bottom.
limited to lighting, right?
No,
Well, because it starts out with C, upon written application and further public hearing, the selectmen have the authority to grant a permissional use to allow deviation from the foregoing light limitations. So this only applies to light limitations.
right.
My
They
question
wanna do
is,
some different lighting, that would be a reason to to not allow internally lit signs, but then it could be
Right.
allowed under this conditional use
But
permit.
as I understand, what this is asking would be that if you wanted to do something on lighting that's a little bit different than what the ordinance allows,
You can get a
you'd have
conditional
to
use
go to the
permit.
selectmen, ask for an exemption, you know, kind of, give me an exemption. Then the selectmen could say, well, we think you can have one, but then you gotta go to the planning board and review it with the planning board, and then the selectmen have to take the input from the planning board and then make a decision? Is that what this is saying you'd have to do?
It's not how I would recommend it, but it's how you
Yeah.
have it, and I
I-
wasn't changing your process
I don't
anywhere.
know why in the world this ever got in there.
I
But
wouldn't,
I think it's I think it's either let the planning board decide to grant an exception or the selectmen and be done with it.
yeah, it would typically be with the planning board.
Well, then we ought to, I have no problem with that, that if you want an exemption, you go to the planning board, the planning board grants you an exemption, you got it. But to have to go then to the selectmen would be silly. I think this got in because, remember when we were remember we were talking about lighting, number of lumens, that, well, you know, we wanna maintain our prerogatives on the planning board. But the selectmen have the right, you know, it's, I would be in favor of letting the planning board decide.
That was something I asked as part of the review with the attorney, with some of the things that were on the select board's hands that wouldn't typically be, and he thought it was okay. I mean, he wasn't making a judgment on whether you should, but
Well, let's change it.
Right. So just say, upon written application and after public hearing, the planning board shall have the authority to grant a conditional use permit and allow deviation from the foregoing light limitation. And, you know, that's the end of it.
okay. Yeah, I mean, none of these things where it's planning board's recommendation to selectmen, I think puts the select board in a really awkward position.
Right, we've got a number of those, and in fact, one keeps coming up over and over again. The selectmen, according to our ordinances, are the code enforcement officer. So when there's a question of whether something, where somebody makes a change, and you get into this, is the new change an allowable use or not? Who makes that decision? Is that the selectmen or the planning board?
Selectmen,
Right, it's the selectmen, I think, as the code enforcement officer.
but if it's a non-residential building and it's changing from one use to another, it has to come for site plan approval first.
Yeah, but who's making the determination whether or not it is a change of
The
use?
select board.
Okay.
Okay, so that's typically the way most towns do it. Okay.
Now, the select board might say, we're not sure what's the planning board's opinion. Go to the
And-
planning board and ask them if they
To
think you
give a
need site plan
judgment.
review.
Yeah, give an
Yeah.
opinion, and
Right.
then we'll take that under consideration.
Yeah, no, not take it into consideration, but first go and ask the planning board if they require site plan review.
Right.
And what happens if the planning board says no, but the selectmen disagree with them? And think that it should have site plan review?
Well, they can't make the planning board
Okay.
make that,
They can't, though,
Determination.
can they? I mean, isn't there like a hierarchy?
no,
There isn't?
select board's not over the planning board.
Right, but,
That,
okay,
then,
so then the selectmen would consider that there's a non-conforming use, right? Because we have this thing that is permitted, it's a commercial use, it is permitted. The selectmen think that it is a new use, right? But the person comes into the planning board and says, is this a change of use, and the planning board says no. So now you have a disagreement between the selectmen and the planning board. How is that resolved?
The only way to get it resolved would really be for the select board to deny the permit and the person to appeal that administrative decision to the zoning board, yeah.
Okay,
'Cause
Yeah, you-
they're the arbiter.
okay, all right, that's, I just wanted to know what the process was.
But the way to get it to go to ZBA is to deny the
Deny,
permit, so that
okay.
there's something to appeal.
Okay,
So it first goes to the selectmen.
so it would go to the selectmen, they can ask, go to the planning board and see what they say.
Right.
Okay.
Alright, so I think I know what you wanna do on that. Let's go to the clean version now for the rest of the sign one, and my apologies that it decided to flip on the short end instead of the long, without my knowing.
Okay, just makes it easier to.
Have to admit, because I worked so late that day, I did not do one copy to check, I just said 15. So if we start kinda with D in the middle of page 28, that would be where we left off in the other version.
If D, basically, one of the things I know that we're gonna struggle with signs, deals with basically directional signs that are on town property, town right-of-ways. Is D basically saying, you wanna put a directional sign up there, there are no rules.
No, it's saying,
In other
That's not
words,
what
it
it's
is
saying.
the sole discretion of the Board of Selectmen if you're gonna be allowed or not allowed.
so let's reword that, cause that's not how I interpret it.
Okay,
Because there are requirements later for signs along roads and all.
right,
This is saying, the select board could say no, even if it meets the requirements. Because there's something else about it that is making the select board feel it would be not appropriate on that public location. This is letting the select board have an,
But in the other
Absolute
way,
power.
wouldn't they also be able to waive all of the requirements? Like
no,
if they didn't meet certain requirements, the selectmen could say, in this case, this sign is really important, and we don't care that it doesn't meet the requirements, we want that sign there.
no,
They can
Shouldn't.
only do the opposite, they can
Shouldn't.
only say, you've met all the requirements, but we still don't like your sign.
that's how it would typically be, yeah.
Okay,
That's what
I'm-
5D
I'm
says, right?
asking, I'm
Sole
not-
discretion. Is that what we're talking about?
well, sole
It's not
discretion, I'm
typical.
with Bill that that means both ways.
That's why I
You
said,
can either waive everything or
I don't know
Or
what it
reject
means.
everything.
reject.
If
Yeah,
you
so
put
let's
that-
reword
If you
that.
put D in,
Right.
why do you need any description
right.
of what you
No,
can and
right.
can't
Right,
do on
exactly.
public property?
It's-
right.
They
Because
move.
you're just
They
saying,
move.
look, we'll,
They
you know,
move. Yeah.
Well, you have that now, you have it in a different place. So let's reword that. Yeah, it's,
Well,
At the
it's,
discretion of the board in conformance with,
well,
No, or what if signs that meet all requirements
are permitted.
may be approved or disapproved by the selectmen at their sole discretion. So they will get to, or may be disapproved by the Board of Selectmen at their sole discretion. That way, you've got it very clearly in there that all signs have to meet the requirements, but the selectmen
Could still
have
turn
this ultimate veto
authority.
authority, that even if they've met all of the requirements, that way the selectmen aren't painted into a corner of having to approve a sign just because it meets all of the
Yeah,
requirements.
but this is only on public property, though. mean, it's
Oh,
not-
right, no, absolutely.
yeah, but we have a lot, most
Yeah.
of the signs that we're gonna struggle with are on public property.
Right,
They're
Yeah.
on the town rights of way.
I
right.
agree, but I think, I don't see any problem with having each sign meet the requirements that, outlined in another section, but for any other reason, the selectmen could say, I don't care if they do meet all the requirements.
Well,
That's
and
what
that's what I'm
I think
saying,
that's
that's what I'm
saying.
saying,
Yeah,
we
yeah.
should,
So why don't we, let's get around, if we could make this statement, that all signs, you know, the right to have a sign on public property is at the sole discretion of the Board of Selectmen. That's what I think
Yeah.
we meant,
Right.
the right to have a sign. And then we could just publish a list of, if you think you might want a sign on our property, here's the guidelines you need to follow. They're not part of the zoning, they're just guidelines. Because we've already made the statement that we reserve the right to just, we'll tell you whether you can or can't have it, and then we'll give them a list of guidelines. Why put it in the zoning?
we can have a
And that's a way
selectmen's-
around this problem that we're gonna
regulation.
run into, we can't read the content of the sign.
Hmm.
Is it a right or is it a determination?
I would interpret this to mean that somebody tried to write that if it's public property, the selectmen have the right to decide what can go on public property or can't, period.
I think it would mean, that permission is required, and that may be the best wording, to just say,
Well-
no signs will be placed on public property without permission of the select board.
Why wouldn't we go as far as saying, this is town property? You wanna do anything on town property, it's at the sole discretion pretty much of the Board of Selectmen. You don't have a right to use town property. Like a business doesn't have a right to use town
Just
property.
because it conforms with the signage regulations. Would you say?
Well, I don't know, we're into a struggling area here, but like, just take Packard's Field. You wanna hold an event on Packard's Field, you gotta get a permit. And is it zoning or guidelines as to what we allow and don't allow? If we could do that, it takes a heck of a lot out of these it basically gets them from regulations to, here's a list of guidelines to follow. Because we wanna be able to say, look, we want you to, wherever possible, share a sign. So we wanna be able to say, look, there's already a sign at that intersection. Attach your little thing to the bottom of the sign. That stuff is tough to write.
And that's later on, but this
Yeah.
sentence is just getting at, we've heard it 3 different ways, and they all probably are fine, that even if it meets the requirements, it still needs the select board permission. That's what this is trying to say, that the permission is required. So, why don't I just come back
about
with
the
some other
power.
language that makes that point?
Yeah.
The power to place signs on public property is at the sole discretion of the Board of Selectmen.
Yeah, I'll come back with some wording that clarifies that that's not talking about what the sign looks like or how many,
Right.
but just
Power to approve.
don't just
placement of
think you
signs.
can do it
Sole
because you got
discretion.
your, because you
Right.
make the zoning.
There's nothing to do what's on the sign, they could disapprove every sign.
But that's just for signs on public property,
Right.
yes.
Yeah,
Power to,
which is.
to place signs on
Which is
public property.
because it's the road right of ways
Yes,
that we wanna, and we've got into this fight before with the
Yeah.
realty
Yeah.
company. I've gotta be able to have a sign showing where my office is.
right.
Well, you wanna put it on town property, you don't have a right to do that.
Right, but say if the town said, no, you can't put it on town property, but for whatever reason they said, well, we'll put it on athletic club property, the town couldn't have anything to
No,
say about that.
you-
Other
Just
than the
declare.
requirements for,
Exactly.
Right.
Sign.
How-
How about something like the right to have a sign on public property is at the sole discretion of the board? Because
I-
really what you're doing is you're giving them the right to do it.
I would say the power, I mean, to me, it's, the decision-making power is in the hand, that's what we want to stress.
I think he's right,
Irrespective of what then you get into what is allowed with regard to what we say about signs, in terms of their construction, material, size, and we can't touch what it says. Here, we're just talking about the power.
Well,
The
it's-
decision-making power is strictly at the hands of then
Well, the
Get
power
into-
to give them the right to put a sign on it.
Well, I think we're all on the same page, we just.
It's
don't
whether
have
the word-
language
the
comes
verbiage,
out.
but-
She'll,
Yeah.
she'll
Be
wordsmith
better
it.
than, yeah.
Yeah.
Wait a minute.
Next.
We know
Just cause I see all the other things coming up.
So
it. We don't want it.
EFTH are all untouched from what you have in there now. And I,
Something
and,
right.
and again, all we're doing is trying to clean it up and trying to bring it in consistency with the Supreme Court decision, not change your sign requirements otherwise. And one of the places that Steve and I had some concerns, it was in a different place, and I can't even now myself know where it was, that talked about basically the signs had to be attractive, and we were trying to come up with some language that would be a little easier to interpret.
Yeah.
And this is my first crack at that, and you'll see this language in a few places, and it may or may not have hit the nail on the head. That's for you to tell me. But instead of just attractive or whatever was the language before, I try to call it the Northern New England Mountain Resort style, is what you have here.
It's not bad, try that.
Yeah.
That's good.
Works right.
So I've
Don't
used
live in
that in a
Southern
few
New England.
We interpret-
places.
That's fine.
Terry, I think. Bill had it.
I'm sorry, Bill?
This is a very interesting section of the zoning ordinance. I'm a big believer in very strict architectural control, but I think it's very, very difficult for a municipality to try to do this, and without being accusatory, I think the town has never really tried to enforce any of these architectural regulations. The only one that people look at is the roof pitch, which I think you've done a good job on, and I think that's good. But nobody knows what Northern New England Mountain Resort style architecture is, and I mean, I would really, if you can find objective ways to control architectural style in a manner that is acceptable to the people in town, I'd say go for it. But boy, these areas that are open to subjective interpretation that never get applied to somebody who applies for a building permit, the gray area, the subjective, these being subjective is really a disservice to people who are trying to comply with it. And it, you know, to a degree, it ought to, if you are gonna do it, it ought to change with zoning. You know, the town's buildings over here use metal siding and stuff that's not consistent with this. Town's exempt anyway, but if that's going on in this zone over here, you know, should that be changed? I just think that, and I know this is the first go-around, but you know, at the next go-around, I think you really need to look at this.
So
And this
what-
doesn't deal with solar panels too, you know, I think you have to figure out if you wanna let solar panels go up or not.
Yeah.
Should.
But, you know,
So my question to Steve was, can a town regulate aesthetics in a zoning ordinance? And he's willing to stand behind that if it's made more specific somehow. You know, it can't be as subjective, he can't help you in court if it's attractive, right? It needs some kind of guidelines,
Okay, but-
standards, it's gonna be in there, but
Are there guidelines? I mean, aesthetics,
But
beauty's in the eye of
See,
the
my-
beholder.
my kind of struggle with that is the further you go into details, the more you're going into design review, which, in my opinion, is only allowed in a historic district in New Hampshire. So, one thing you could do to be specific is say it, you know, again in keeping with Steve's thinking that you can regulate aesthetics, would it be better to say it has to be similar to the majority of the other signs in town? That's an objective standard in terms of coloring, materials, glittering. I wonder if you could do something like that, if this doesn't work.
I think you almost have to defer to the selectmen. What are they willing to enforce?
Well, that's a
You know,
different
and
question.
if they say, we're not gonna go there, then don't put it in here. I mean, we've got red
Right.
roofs on buildings, we have building materials that aren't used, and nobody knows what post-66 architectural design was, or whatever it was. I mean, I gotta go back to the selectmen and say,
The
what
only
do you
thing
want
that
to do?
I've found as a selectman that's been useful is we have some statements somewhere in the zoning that you need to maintain your property in a manner that's consistent with adjoining properties.
Right.
And we have taken action against people that refuse to paint, you know, where the shutters falling off, where they don't mow the lawn. But other than that, Bill,
Right.
I
That's a
agree
good
with
point,
you.
though, that's a
but that's
important
the
point.
one, that's an important one, because we
Yeah.
have taken action and people have responded when they've allowed the property to deteriorate.
It's more clear cut. Here we're talking about signs.
Oh, yeah, right.
And did we not have a pedestrian study that included signage?
Yeah.
So can't we, if that comes to pass, can't we in this particular passage, require or make it a guideline, I'm clear in my mind on that whatever signage we have in the town conforms to that particular signage?
Except
Probably
that there isn't necessarily,
not.
it's part of our ongoing process from
Right.
that city to develop what the family of signage we
Right.
allow will be. We're just not there yet, still applying
Right.
for grants to get.
We didn't
money
pick one.
for it.
My,
No, I hear,
my
but
sense,
once we do.
my guess is
Yeah.
that Steve would say no,
Okay.
because the argument for being able to regulate aesthetics is maintaining property values. So it's really just about something not being so ugly that it's gonna detract from the value of the property across the street.
Also to protect the natural.
That's why I think this discussion we had
Ugly.
before about signs on public property is very, if we can
That's-
if we can say they're at the sole discretion and there are a set of guidelines you gotta follow,
Right.
that's where almost all of this stuff that came in on signage, on trails and everything, is they're all on public property.
Mhm.
They're not on private property per se mostly, so that might be the way to do it if we can get away with that.
If we have the guidelines, I mean, I can see where someone can say that, you may say in your documents that the board has sole discretion to determine,
Right.
but that can be challenged if a person feels it's
I-
arbitrary. If they say, we meet the guidelines, why are you singling me out, and they can take you to court on something?
No, and I would propose that
We have to
we
have-
have a set of
we have to have a
guidelines
set
that
of
people would
guidelines.
follow. But the guidelines then, you know, you get into, I don't think you meet the guidelines. You know, we've got this statement that says they must look like, a northern New England vacation resort per the examples in book A, and if they don't, our judgment is they don't.
Well, that's what I was struggling with, that's why I was wondering if this pedestrian study would provide us the examples we could refer to as to what is allowed,
Well, I
Yeah,
think,
it's-
or what the
Yeah,
guidelines
sorry.
could be.
I think you're right, and let me ask, why don't I ask the attorney that question is, what about, striking this, but can then the select board manage the design based on the pedestrian study and a
Right.
chosen set? Let me ask that question.
That's public property. I mean,
Yeah, so
Right.
the
'Cause I think
family
you
of
probably could
signs
then-
idea in the pedestrian study would be on public land.
Right,
Right,
And then everything has to conform to that.
conform, right.
right.
right, and
Now
then
it
we
gets
just
what
take
conform
this
means.
sentence
Right,
out.
well, yeah,
That's step
Yeah.
2, or 3.
And in that
Well-
case, we would take that whole sentence out,
right.
yeah.
Because it's not just the look of the signs, the big concern was not having a whole trail of signs going down the whole road as it comes, so it's, it still needs to be at the selectmen's discretion, because you don't wanna have 5
Too
signs
many.
in a row
Right.
that, blur the visibility.
We just have to pick one.
So the next section, prohibited sign features, I added a couple words, just, why don't you just read that and see if that works?
Oh, you don't want those balloons, those men that go into the air and go like this?
You caught what I added, huh?
We have Wendy's,
There we go, Wendy.
yeah, right, they have the blow-up sign.
Yeah, that hasn't been there since it's.
Oh, is that
but
right?
Yeah,
I'm
the,
sorry.
no, the Wendy's restaurant for the, what was this event? in the
Special
winter?
one.
No, it was the, oh, where's my brain? Well, they were a sponsor and they put their little frosty thing right in front of the.
Oh, that's right, I remember that. I do remember that.
Yeah,
Inside Town Square. we think.
yeah, exactly.
That's fine.
Well, it'll be a lot shorter.
I can't,
We're on,
I know, but I can't,
I'll see what the comparison is.
can't go by page anymore.
No, I would just, I think you should just read the rest of the sign section and talk about it, cause to get out the things that were specific to content, I combined in a bunch of sections and took some out. It's just too complicated to talk about in terms of changes.
I was thinking on the permanent signs that we could replace, what we could do is create a table based on the type of property.
Mm-hmm.
So if you think about, we've got vacant land, we've got single-family and two-family home sites, we've got condominium properties, we've got association properties, we've got da-da-da. And for each of that different type of land, we could define how many signs are you allowed. And like in the case of condominium, it could be written in a way like if you've got a condominium, you're allowed one sign per entrance, you know, off of a town road or something, or, you know, but we could, for each of those, and we could define size if we wanted to, and possibly even exceptions. So like on single-family homes, we might say, you know, that the numbers on your mailbox aren't a sign, you know?
You could, it's late in the process, and I had understood from your minutes and all that there was a committee maybe working on that.
Yeah,
but
there is. Well, right, I
but I-
haven't done much with it, but, yeah.
Right, so I didn't
Yeah,
have that
right.
input, and I didn't wanna change your
But-
sign requirements, but just try to bring them into compliance at
Yeah.
this point.
But my again goes back to my concern would be trying to get them in compliance in the amount of time we have available is going to open them wide up. It is just gonna allow everything. And we'd be better off just staying with where we are until we can really, and I think it's gonna take the better part of a year to try to recraft these,
Well,
given the way we work.
I actually haven't changed your requirements,
Yeah.
I've brought them into compliance, and I think if you read through that, you'll see
Yeah,
that.
well, But right away, because the sections on real estate signs get stricken out, right?
Yeah, Steve,
So
Steve
on vacant land, can somebody put up a for sale sign? See, I would think now you could.
But wouldn't that sign have to be 3x3 and all of the other requirements?
Right, but I think if you get, but what I'd rather do is go through the type of property and have a discussion. What's our objective? On single-family home sites, do we want to allow people to have a sign or not? Now, I realize we can't regulate content, but do we want to let them have a sign? Because if we say yes, then we've got, the reality is gonna be there will be real estate signs. That will be their sign. So if we don't want real estate signs, then we have to say on single-family properties, no signs are allowed. You know? And I think that's the discussion that we're gonna have to have, and it's gonna take a while, to get some consensus on that.
Well, you don't allow them now, so I kept it that way. I didn't change your sign requirements.
But how could you ban real estate signs? The only way I know to do it is to read them.
But you don't allow
Any
signs on single-family property now. So what I did still doesn't. I didn't change the
Right,
requirements.
but how about vacant land
Or condominiums.
or condominiums? Could you put a for sale sign on a condominium property now? I'm just saying I think we
With a
need to be
temporary
very
sign
careful
permit. With a,
before we change this.
with a temporary sign permit. You could.
Yeah, there could be 20 signs in front of the Black Bear.
Yeah.
Right.
Or they always have one for sale, just have one.
Right, you
It's
could
gonna start
limit,
temporary.
you could limit the
It's not
temporary
temporary.
signs to one.
But what if it's not temporary? What if they take the gamble, there's always a property for sale, we want people in looking until the time.
Well, then
Well,
that's,
yeah, I
that's
mean,
their
exactly.
prerogative
It's
for their sign.
But the Black Bear already has a sign. So
Right.
would that be their one sign, so
Well, I think
you
right
don't
now
have to
you,
worry about the for
right now
sale
you allow two,
Yeah.
so I left it
or
as two.
whatever.
Right.
Other than,
So it, right now, you can't say whether they put for sale or the name of their business on that sign. You just can't. That's not in a gray area with the new decision.
Well, then we can't.
You can regulate on the use, not the content. So
Wow, I didn't
you
know
can
that.
have a different number. Well, for multifamily, not because it's
Right.
condominium, but for multifamily, you could have a different number. I mean, you're right that you could do it with a table, as long as you're talking about the number and size of signs.
Number, size, and
Strictly
maybe you
that.
could
And if-
put some language in that would clarify what are some of the exemptions you could get.
And if somebody chooses to use their one for sale
Right.
sign, that's their business.
That's their business.
But if they have two entrances, I'm thinking Windsor Hill, so we have one sign for Windsor Hill, one entrance, another entrance, interested in renting or buying, call, blah, blah, blah.
And you
number,
could
And
s-
they can do that, right?
And somewhere it already says that in here. If there's more than one road frontage for
Right.
the use,
Yeah.
one
You can allow an
additional
extra one.
sign.
Yeah.
Right.
So
Right.
that's.
It's just
so
that you
that's
can't
not-
say what can be on that sign.
Right, so, but I'm saying, so that is now allowed.
So the
They can
way,
do that.
the way the rules are right now, we could have that kind of sign? Is that what we're saying?
So
mean,
I-
we could
so
have
I
that
didn't
for sale
change-
or rent
I didn't
Call
change,
this- name?
I didn't change numbers or where they can be or size or any of that. But I took out the language that was about what's on the sign.
Right.
Because
So
that's
they-
what's in
Okay.
violation of the Reed decision.
So they could
Okay.
do that, so an association with, or a hotel with
Right
two
now, there
entrances
is no
could do
prohibition.
that, right?
Under the new
Under the
Supreme Court
new
decision,
Supreme
That's
Court
not
decision, but
upheld.
our regulations do say you can't have a for sale
right,
sign.
your
on that.
regulations are full of content based.
Right,
So
You're
that they'll
taking
be
them out.
so what Bill's arguing is leave it alone, leave that content base.
If somebody
But we're gonna-
wants to sue us, we'll back down.
And that's your decision. I was
Yeah.
hired to do that.
Right, yeah, no.
And
right.
I've done it, and if you want me to undo it, and you can pay for that too, that's,
And I
That
think we
doesn't hurt
should
me,
change
but-
these, but I'm very leery on changing them quickly.
Right.
That will have unintended consequences we haven't thought through. And,
Perhaps an alternate view would be that we hired a professional to discuss with us and to show us where we need to make changes to be in compliance with
right,
current law. So therefore, ought not we to, at our earliest opportunity, come into compliance with current law in full expectation that at some other point later during the year, we may have to make other changes because current law is still somewhat unsettled, but we show that we are trying as an entity to abide by what is generally understood to be in compliance with the law at this time.
We paid for recommendations, we just haven't
Well, my recommendation, since you did pay your recommendations, since you're doing the zoning amendments in two pieces, the kind of clean up and bring into compliance for this town meeting, and then the understanding was there'd be some continued work on more substantive issues.
Exactly.
That, you know, you
Exactly.
could make these changes now to be in compliance with the law, but still add the table
Right.
for the next, as part of the next batch for the following year.
So when we go
Because-
to town meeting, we're simply saying we are changing what we've changed to make it to be in compliance with current law and
Right,
standards.
because this doesn't change how many signs people can have, or on what kind of properties, or what size. This leaves everything just as it is, other than it's not about content. And then the actual changes that you're thinking of making, might make more sense as part of the bigger substantive changes.
Because there are a couple of discussions we haven't closed out, and I think, Bill, you had mentioned, I forget what now, the mind is starting to blur here. But, yeah, having to do with the parking and additional, or was that, it was something else, it was
Right.
a couple other things I think we agreed to, or we seem to have a consensus that we need to look at that. We may not be able to come to a decision on that issue now, but why not just make the changes that will put us in compliance with what our professional advisor is telling us will put us in compliance.
Because it makes huge changes.
You say this,
But it puts us
these,
in compliance.
what you've got on here has not been reviewed by Steve yet, or it has? Steve Whitley?
No, I'd run it by him, Nick. I mean, we've had some back and forth on, this strikes out what he struck out.
Yeah, he did go through some of it, and especially with the Reed case, you know, he's had some input on that, right?
Right, everything
So-
that he struck out is gone,
Yeah,
but I also did some kind of
To fix it.
reorganizing them
Yeah.
to make it
Right.
still make sense.
Right.
yeah.
To put all the
So
temporary
from a
signage
legal
together.
content standpoint, we're also bringing ourselves more into compliance.
And you're saying, Tara, there's no substantive change other than to say that you've eliminated any reference to, or anything that might be construed as, requiring reading of the sign.
As you've discussed, the effect on that is that there is a substantive change in that now you can have real estate signs.
Right.
Right, because to come into compliance with the law, you can't regulate the content of the temporary sign.
So by,
But you could limit, you know, to one. 'Cause right now, you don't really, for most temporary signs, you don't have a limit. If you're concerned about that, why not put a limit of one temporary sign for now? And then look at that again when you do the next batch in terms of a use table.
It seems to me that the first step is simply to be in compliance. So as quickly as we can be in compliance, we should be in
I
compliance.
see no risk of not being, here's where I disagree.
Okay.
We accidentally discovered we were not in compliance. There's no town around here has changed anything based on this Supreme Court ruling. So until we're convinced, you know, so I don't see any reason that we have to do this right away, that it's time driven. It's not like the government's gonna come and shut us down if we're not in compliance. Nothing's gonna happen. So the worst that's gonna happen is someone's gonna say, so we're gonna deny a sign permit based on the current rules, and someone's gonna say, well, you can't do that, I'm gonna take you to court. At which time, we'll have to decide whether we wanna fight it or not fight it. But that's the worst that could happen to us, I think.
I wouldn't say it's accidental. New Hampshire Municipal Association has been doing a lot of outreach on it to try to save towns from running
Right.
into court costs.
But how many have done it?
A handful right now.
Right.
That's why they're doing a lot of outreach to try to.
It's, I hear you, but I'm saying, it's in front of us now. We have town council saying something, we have a professional who's
Just 'cause they're
recommending
breaking the
something.
law
I
doesn't mean we
think,
should.
I believe, it might, based on what I've heard people say, that the real estate sign issue is a very emotional one in this town. People residents don't want real estate signs. And we need to find a way in all of these rules and regulations to make sure that we don't end up with, with 50, for sale signs. Because will go up immediately if they can find a way around.
But they can go up immediately now.
No, right now you can't put them up according to the rules.
But the rules are not in compliance
So
with.
they're not enforceable.
They're not.
Well,
It's
but
not
that's the
enforceable.
they're enforceable unless, as long, when somebody decides to take us to court, they're not enforceable. But no one's ever come and said, well,
I guess that's what I'm saying,
I'm
is
gonna
that
take it to
perhaps
court.
as a public servant of a
Yeah.
sort, it's deceptive for someone to see this when we fully know that there's nothing we can do to enforce this now. So someone reading this can say, oh, I guess I can't put up a for sale sign, and they don't do it, which maybe we like, but the point is, they actually can. And we know that they can.
Anyone
And
who
our
watched
lawyer
this,
knows that they can,
yeah.
and the professional sitting here has told us that they can within certain, within a certain construction. I don't mean physical, but
Yeah.
legal construction.
So anyone who's taken the time to watch this meeting online would realize that they can put up a for sale sign. But I think
Right.
to Bill's point, perhaps there are other ways to prevent having 50 for sale signs. Can we look at timeline? Can we look at, what are our options?
let's start
For-
with, let's, single family home sites.
Right.
No signs of any kind?
And that would prevent, single and
Vacant
two
land.
family.
Right.
What do you wanna let on vacant land? No signs?
I'm not disagreeing that it requires further discussion.
Right.
I'm just saying that ought not we, since we know what the legal requirements are, ought not our legal documents, our guiding documents, reflect what we know to be?
When we gotta
In
get it drafted by?
I think you need to make a final decision on what you're gonna have a public hearing on at your next meeting.
So we've got to do this between now and the December meeting, and then hold a public hearing. I'm okay with that, but I think it's a lot of work to make sure to try to get this right.
Would-
Well, you're talking about going on further steps. I guess I'm not faking that out.
I would,
Well, we can't change it without bringing it to town meeting, and if we bring it to town meeting, we have to
It's
have
changed,
it
but I
set.
guess it's changed for us now. We need to recognize that. I think that's the point.
What I would focus on in that, for this kind of phase of the changes is the temporary sign section. And put in there, are temporary signs allowed on residential property? Are they not? Is there a limit of one temporary sign? I would handle it there right now. That way you're leaving the other sign standards alone. It's really mostly how it affects temporary signs.
and
Because
they-
because you, like a lot of towns, have different rules for different kinds of temporary signs, and that's really what was taken away by
all right,
Reed.
now, look, just realize what we, so if I took what was written, and it basically is properties other than single family or two family are permitted to display up to 2 signs on the lot, right? Okay, so vacant land, so he can put up a new development sign right away. Right now, the regulations say you cannot do that. And all I'm saying is, are we ready to go to allowing all of that to happen?
No, I hear what you're saying. My question is, it's not within our capacity to determine that, if I understand.
No, you
It
can.
is.
No, in terms of you're talking about
We've
a
gotta
realty
do
sign.
we've gotta put
Right.
the work in necessary to say, on vacant land, here's what you can do. On single-family home sites, here's what you can do. It isn't just striking out references, cause it leaves, and I'd have to go through this in some detail, but I think it's gonna leave some loopholes.
But what other than temporary signs are affected?
Well-
Or that you're concerned about?
Permanent signs. We've had this argument with Green Peak. He could put up on the lot next to Green Peak a sign that says, coming soon, blah, 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 blah.
And you're calling that a permanent sign?
If he applies for a permanent sign, it's a permanent sign. Are we ready to go?
Well, I
To
guess-
allow all of that to happen? I'm
Maybe
not, I'm
maybe
gonna
I'm
stand up and
misunderstanding
say in a
something.
town meeting, don't
Right.
vote for this.
I-
This is stupid.
Maybe I'm misunderstanding something. So, Tara, the recommendations here, what you've stricken, and the modified language you provided, you were saying that that was done only to comply with current legal standards as set by the Reed decision.
Right.
It doesn't try to bring the spirit of our regulations back, it just takes away anything
Right.
offending,
And it
but it
opens a bunch
doesn't-
of doors.
yeah.
But we have no control over that. Until someone changes that decision, if it's ever changed or somehow modified.
I think you'd have trouble finding a lawyer to represent you in court because it's so clear.
But I think the thing is
See,
that,
that's my point.
yeah, so, I see definitely your argument for coming into compliance, but I see Bill's point that we should put in what we need to put in to keep the town's character. So we can come into compliance and keep the spirit of the regulations. And that's gonna take a
Okay.
fair amount of work in 4 weeks.
Yeah, it's too much.
I see it as two very separate things. One is a legal responsibility, and one is making changes within that legal construct that allow us to do what we want to do, if such a thing is possible. But we have no choice for the first part of it. That
Well,
is there.
Except that, and I'll ask
No,
this
that is
question,
there.
what would your
That is a
guess
legal
be of how many
determination.
towns in New Hampshire will be in compliance with the Reed decision by changing their zoning by next town meeting in New Hampshire? Would half the towns, you figure, are working on this?
No, probably not half.
No. So
Okay.
half of them are right away, you get, so you get into, so what are we gonna, what are they, so everybody's vulnerable.
If
Yeah,
this
but I
is-
don't want to be vulnerable. I mean, as a
Right.
town, I think we know what the correct
I
path is.
just wanna do it right.
If a sign ordinance changes, do existing signs get grandfathered?
Yeah.
Sure.
So this work that's been done can be there for next town meeting. And we can change it if there are any further decisions by the Supreme Court that
Mhm.
tweak what Reed says. I mean, we're not going to just throw all of this away and start all over again during 2017 and then go to 2018 town
Same,
meeting,
yeah.
right? So this is a starting point, but if we don't implement it, we don't create the holes that are created by taking the content-based stuff out of here. If we get challenged, we can always fall back on this as to where we're gonna draw the line, right? And what we're gonna fight and what we're not gonna fight. If we have to give in to something, we have to give in. But then we can come up with the chart so that we're all, because it's gonna come down to, I mean, just looking at properties with uses other than single-family or two-family dwelling units are permitted to display up to 2 signs on the lot. And they are freestanding, the other one can be a facade, and the permanent sign is limited to 32 square feet. Is that gonna be 1 sign like that, 2 signs like that? You know,
Yeah,
I
that,
think that's the question we're gonna have, because we're not gonna be able to change anything else there other than the number of signs.
yeah, I didn't
And maybe
change
where they're
that.
located. You know what I mean? It's, so, but we have to have that conversation in a lot of detail before you make the sign, and I think that's what Bill is saying. Do we wanna give up, because right now you can't put up a for sale sign in that situation, that's what we've taken out.
But could you add in to what Tara's already done, something to the effect that the planning board or the selectmen have authority to not allow a sign if it was detrimental to the property values or didn't protect the natural scenic beauty for the town? In other words, can you put something in there that would protect for the interim time, towns or the selectmen or the planning board's authority to say, no, you can't put that lot for sale sign up there on the piece of property because it devalues the adjacent property and in the overall town, the scenic value of the town if you've got real estate for sale signs all over the place. That's what the zoning ordinance is supposed to do, and that's
Right,
what.
but that's still content-based.
Well, it's not content-based. It's a large sign in the middle of a vacant lot that really has no purpose other than just sit there and be very visual, and it detracts from the scenery.
You could not allow signs on vacant property.
Or
We
for the
that goes back to, we should expand this out a little bit anyway, and at least say, here's the different categories of types of land. These are what you are or are not allowed in terms of signs, so vacant land. And I'll tell you, right, we've had this public hearing, and we're gonna get into this again, we're gonna get into now vacant land, we're gonna get right back into the discussion, do we wanna allow somebody to put up a sign, a sign on vacant land? Because it's going to be, what other sign would you put on vacant land other than new development coming? Up to now, we've said we don't want those kinds of signs.
People put
Love
informational
elephants.
signs.
Elvis is
Yeah,
coming.
yeah. Jesus saves, I mean, you've seen,
Well,
Love
that
elephants.
that is also possible,
Yeah.
right? Vacant land.
Don't-
more likely real estate.
I like Bill's approach, particularly as it relates to home sites, condominiums, and houses for sale. I think a proliferation of for sale signs, 16 in front of Windsor Hill or the Black Bear Lodge cheapens the whole product of Waterville Valley. But I would make one suggestion for you to consider is, I think in the future, if Waterville Valley wants new developments like the new hotel you see in Lincoln,
Right.
you're gonna want a new development sign. And you can make them small, you can make them tasteful, you can limit them to one, there's a whole bunch of things you can do. But I think you can take Bill's approach and you can deal with it by zone.
Right.
And if you deal with it by zone, you can allow that new development sign, small, however you wanna do it. But I feel very strongly that if we want to be user-friendly, to do development, and if we believe we need new beds, new hotels, you want all that high-density stuff on C1, you gotta give the property owner the ability to let the drive-by public know that something's going on there. It doesn't have to be big, it doesn't have to be gaudy, it doesn't have to be lit, but I really think that's a really, really important thing that's coming up in the future.
Don't disagree with that, but I'm trying to think of something to do in the interim here, because we've got a situation where we've got something that really should, because of our knowledge of the situation, be addressed. And we also have a resulting problem that probably
Right.
will occur.
Mhm.
So if we can get something in that writing that covers that problem, we might be able to get it on this year's town meeting. But, I don't know how to word it that way, but all I'm saying is it should be, if it can reflect back to the idea that a sign cannot devaluate the adjacent property or mess up the scenery or something like that, then the selectmen can say, no, you can't put that up there, regardless of what the word is. You can turn around, I'm not reading it, I'm just looking at the back of that sign, and it's ugly, you can't put it there.
If I'm understanding correctly, we're in a legal straitjacket on this kind of thing. Is that correct?
In what we remove, but we're not in
No,
legal
I don't
No,
share that we're in a legal straitjacket. Nobody's gonna come and do they're not gonna shut the town down.
No, I'm not, I meant in terms of what we have been told that what we have is in compliance. That's all
I
I'm saying.
agree that it's not in compliance.
Right now, people can come along and put up real estate signs.
And we ought to be working on getting it in compliance. There's no disagreement. The
Right.
problem is
You're
I
talking
don't
about
think we
pace.
have enough time to
You're
get it
talking
in
about pace.
compliance.
With regulations, once you start working on the regulation, isn't there a backlog time on that?
How
No,
much-
that's if you post a public hearing for zoning amendments.
But let me, cause I started to work on this, cause we.
Yeah, no, I remember you
so
sent
I
around
had
the.
a table.
Yeah, you had the table.
So, yeah, and right away, what I can see is, so here, I just put together a straw man. So, single-family, two-family home sites, what I would start with is, you're limited to one sign, 3 by 3 feet, right? Right, just on that one, we're gonna have a lengthy discussion. Well, I don't know, maybe there should be no signs. We're gonna have to decide. To get something, in the next 4 weeks, we're gonna have to go through each one of these and decide as a group, what do we want? What do we want? So, like competed condominiums, but you get completed commercial properties with multiple businesses located in them, vacant land, vacant property with approved site plan for residential commercial development. That could be different than just vacant land. So I would say for vacant land, you allow none, but something where you've got an approved site plan, well, now you're allowed a sign, right? And I don't have the answers for these, but I'm just saying every one of these is going to be an hour's worth of discussion, because we have to open to the public. We're gonna get public input, there are gonna be lots of different opinions, and then somehow we've gotta meld this into, here's our recommendation. I don't think we've got enough time to do it.
And you're saying that the changes that Tara's recommending in this section,
I don't have any problem with most of her changes.
in this section,
Right.
with regard, but are going to allow, because we don't have that
Right.
table.
Right.
See,
Right.
where it really gets complicated, like recreational property. All right, what do we allow on recreational property? One big sign, but what do we do with the golf course? He's got little signs all over the place out there. Do we allow him to, so you gotta start right, well, if you can't read them from 50 feet away, they don't apply. I mean,
No, I get
it's
all
gonna
that.
get
I
complicated.
guess it gets back to are the changes that you're recommending
Right.
actually open
Yeah, I mean,
it up in that
I was
manner that
driving
Bill
by the
is
golf course,
describing,
I said,
or is
"Oh,
it
it's got
already the
these little
case?
hole signs. Is that a sign?
Well, that's kind of semantic. I mean, it's whether
We're talking
somebody'd
about,
win
yeah.
a challenge or not. But, I mean, it sounds like to be able to move forward, we should say the sign changes are in the second batch, and as Mark said, here's a start. And if we could move forward with
All the other stuff.
all the other stuff.
other than the
um,
sign changes.
And you,
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
have your committee or whatnot, and give me that table to
that's fine.
incorporate and your other changes that you wanna make in the sign section for next time.
but I think, actually on the signs, the one thing I think we ought to try to get answered is the thing, do we have to write regulations or just guidelines for signs on public property? Because writing them for the public property is what was a real bear.
Yeah, I'll ask Steve that.
And if we could basically say, could we produce a set of guidelines that people could follow, but in effect, we could just say yes or no arbitrarily, would be a huge help.
Are we going on until supper here, Tara?
I hope not, cause I have
think
other
the
meetings.
She's gonna go.
Let's do it that
This
way.
is all signs.
So, yeah, if we pass by the signs and go back to the red line version and go to the bottom of page 32. One of the questions I had, as I said, for the attorney was whether you can have architectural regulations, because typically you can't unless it's a historic district. But Steve is willing to back you up, if you make them a little clearer. So that again was my attempt with the Northern New England Mountain Resort style, because I don't know how else to be clear without having design review, which is limited to historic districts.
Right, yeah.
So
We
it's
do
kind
not
of
wanna go
a
there.
rock and a hard place with this.
But saying currently dominant sort of does help clarify.
Yeah, that's why I put that, the idea is this, the select board can't be arbitrary and just decide if it looks nice to them, but.
If we can determine it's dominant.
Well,
And also to give them some guidance when they can modify the roof pitch. We Steve and I agreed that needed to be clearer. And I put some mitigation in on that. Good enough to stay in there for a month anyway. The yellow on page 33, this PUD process doesn't really follow the state law, and it's another one with some select board involvement. But it's kind of it's a bigger issue, and I know that you wanted to talk more about PUDs and density and all of that, so I was just suggesting that just be left alone until the next batch. But I did make some tweaks lower on the page, just to bring it into compliance, at least a little bit with. Sorry, did you have a question?
No, I had a comment. I was just pointing out that it says that it's gotta be listed, PUDs are allowed as a use by right or accessory use by right. But I didn't see them listed anywhere, in any zone.
They're not,
Unless I
they're not
missed something.
no,
Huh?
You-
Did I miss something?
no. You did
Somewhere
not.
you say they're allowed in every zone. Yeah, well, I just thought, as I said, there's more that needs changing in the PUD stuff, so I just left it alone, except for adding the requirement for a public hearing.
Well, no,
Public
what Ray
notice.
is saying is in paragraph 2, it says allowed in any zoning district in which PUDs are allowed as a use by right, but they're not listed
They're not listed.
as a use by right, I don't think.
I know, there are a few,
So we just need to add PUD as a use by right and an accessory use by right, or
but
one or the other.
there's a few contradictions throughout the ordinance about PUDs, and I had understood that was something the board wanted to talk more about in part of talking about the whole density issues, and it wasn't clear to me necessarily whether it was gonna end up all districts. So
Right.
just suggesting that we talk about that in the bigger context
Well, but in phase 2, or are we gonna?
in phase
Are
2.
we, well, if we're gonna leave this language though, right, then shouldn't we put them as a use by right or an accessory use by right in every zone for this year? Because that's how it's referred to,
It's another,
or say in every zone, one or the other. You gotta do,
my
don't you?
recommendation's gonna be that it doesn't go to the select board. I mean, I have
Right.
bigger changes to make here, so I
okay,
just didn't wanna get into the nitty gritty of that, cause I think
Oh, I
there's
see.
a lot of
I see,
problems with
okay.
it. I was just trying to put in the public notice requirement, because that's a big one.
Okay,
And I took out design review because that's optional. You can't require design review. And I added the third party review. Just trying to put some stuff gaps in. You allow, see, this is where I thought you had a conflict. You allow planned unit developments in a couple of districts, not all districts. It's never an accessory use.
Yeah, it's an LDR.
as an allowed use,
Yeah.
oh, okay.
Right, it's never gonna be accessory, that makes no sense.
Right.
See it in LDR.
You allow them in a couple of districts, not all districts. And so I struck that on page 34, because you don't allow them in any zoning district.
HDR they're not in.
I think it's just the high density and,
I think it's just
Low
LDR is all it's.
LDR is the only one that's in.
And that's the one area
And
where
that's
they don't
where
make any
where you
sense.
don't
Yeah.
make any sense.
They ought to be in HDR, they ought to be in village commercial, they ought to be in
yeah,
C1,
that's why I thought it was a bigger
and not
com-
not recreational, probably.
That's in the pile of things that we would have talked about at a working meeting in October,
Yeah.
but didn't, so I think it's the continued conversation, but right now is just trying to make a few small changes to
Mhm.
make it a little less open for lawsuit and a little bit more consistent.
That's a big one.
Because it's interesting, I guess, we actually had a PUD, right? We've had several of them. And
In
I
the
guess
wrong
they're
zone.
in zones that are not allowed, right?
I don't know, what's the one down there, is it, what's that?
Well, I
zone
think
down
that's-
there?
That's LDR.
That is LDR.
Yeah,
That was
that one
LDR.
is, this one out here
Right,
is
the-
LDR.
The whole
think they were
PUD
around
and
C was the other
Oh,
one
were they?
changed
We
it.
that
took
we
them
had.
out. Oh, maybe that's it. Maybe you're right, Ray. Maybe they were in and we took them out
Out of the
because
wrong
we
places,
didn't want them again.
Oh, we may have done that. We may have taken them out of the wrong places.
Yeah.
Left it in the wrong place and took them out of the wrong
Right.
place.
we'll revisit that.
Yeah.
Page 35, the selectmen can require the applicant to engage professional expertise. That's not quite right. What is right is what I added at the bottom of page 33, that you can obtain third-party review and consultation. So you can't tell them who they have to hire, but you can certainly take their plan and make them pay for your review of it, your outside review, your peer review.
Okay.
The other things I struck on page 35, we talked about last time we met, that's just not legal, you can't, that's a taking, you can't require anybody to give land for a public purpose, only for, on their own development, to set land aside, say for recreation or open space, but not to give the town land ever. They can offer to, but you can't require
Is that sort of semantics? I mean,
it, no,
so
it's a taking.
you can, alright.
Require an applicant to make a reasonable.
Page 36, you can't require people to rent a solid waste container from you, and that wouldn't, if you could, it wouldn't go into zoning, that's, page 38,
What we really want to say is there, I believe, is that the solid waste container needs to be consistent with town standards. Otherwise, we can't pick it up.
Truck can't do that.
Oh, yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's gotta
I
have
think
the
that's why it was in
removal.
there, right?
yeah, that's not a zoning, it just,
Right, it's
Doesn't
just a,
fall in the
I
zoning.
agree, it's not a zoning thing, it's
Right.
a regulation thing.
yeah.
Yeah.
Page 38, this is something that your lawyer and I discussed, that you were going a little too far in what people couldn't do with a grandfathered sign.
No.
You had said altered, and it couldn't be altered in any way whatsoever, including renovation, and we agreed that it really should be relocated, enlarged, or altered in a manner which increases the degree of nonconformity. Not redesigned or painted or whatnot.
Alright.
Then, the last thing is under the Board of Adjustment. One thing we talked about last time we met was making it a little bit clearer what gets a special exception approved. For starters, it has to be on the list of special exceptions. It's not just something that's different or not on the list. And you had the change of use required a special exception, and that really needed to be a change from one special exception to another. I suggested some language that would help the zoning board decide whether it's, suggest ways they might look at how it affects neighboring property, like noise, traffic, lighting, hours of operation, and stormwater. This is the wording about the variance I added from the statute. Unnecessary hardship is defined in the statute and should be in here for the zoning board. And I added, development's regional impact, that was another thing I was asked to do to bring it into compliance with current law.
We like compliance.
So I would make these changes, make another version that sets aside the sign changes till next time, and get that to you to take a careful, in time to take a careful read before the December meeting so that you can finalize it then.
So having the January meeting on the second Thursday of January 2017, are we, I thought when I looked at the calendar that we were not gonna be in time to hold the final public hearing on zoning amendments. Can we just check those dates?
I think that's good, yeah, I have those dates, but not with
Yeah,
me, but I don't think that leaves time for a second hearing, I think it's fine if
Okay,
you're
so
only
we're
gonna have
okay
one.
with the one?
I'll
Right.
double check that, but that's how I
I just wanna
think
make
it
sure
is.
we may have to have a special meeting a little earlier in January or
Or,
at the end of December or something.
yeah,
Just be ready for that. We'll check the dates and make sure that, because at the December meeting, you're gonna have to vote on language, which we then make available to the public and schedule the public hearing, right, Tara?
I'm 99, I'll double check, but I'm 99% sure the second Thursday of January is fine unless you need a second one. What it doesn't do is allow time for a second hearing if you made any changes as a result of the
Right,
first.
so you,
With the sign stuff gone, how likely is that?
I don't think that's very likely. I mean, most of these changes are,
You
Pretty
can drop
straightforward.
them and not,
Yeah,
you can
drop
drop
them.
something
you
without
just won't be
another.
able to change
Right.
the language that you come up with in December.
And I've only heard this once, but I actually had a very well-respected land use attorney say, if you make the changes at the hearing, then people had an opportunity to be part of that. I'm not sure I agree with
Yeah,
that,
well,
but it's,
it also has to do with changing the intent of the change. Like, if you're just making an administrative,
oh yeah, that's fine,
You
but
know,
this
that's
was a
fine,
top,
but
this,
this-
that's not what the conversation was, that's that.
it was a substantial
Yeah.
change? Wow, I've never
was,
heard that. I've
It seemed
heard
like it
the-
was making the interpretation to fit the need at the time,
Yeah.
but I would not recommend making
No.
substantive changes.
No.
But you can drop them,
Right,
drop
drop
changes.
them right out. Okay, so December, we know what we're gonna need to do.
Okay.
That would be on 8 December, right? I'm just,
December 8th.
second Thursday.
Yeah.
It's always the second Thursday.
And that may be early enough. I wanna say it's like January 14th or something. There's a date that, when I looked at the calendar, I kinda
The
jumped
second
out.
Thursday in January is the 12th.
That'll be, your regular meeting would be fine if you only have one here.
Second meeting in January is
The
the
second
12th?
Thursday is on the 12th.
Yeah, so the 12th of January is when they'd be holding the public hearing.
That's fine if you only have one.
Yeah.
That's gonna work fine if you only have one.
Okay. So we're good.
Okay. Thank you, Tara.
Yeah. Believe it or not, Tara, that was easier than other issues we've had.
But see why I suggested an extra meeting
Yeah.
for zoning
Well,
changes.
we got a lot of them, a lot of easy ones.
They aren't things you wanna rush into, you're right, that you wanna think about them for every angle.
So I was daydreaming, what's
Conservation.
happening here?
December,
Yes.
we're gonna have, she's gonna provide you before the December meeting with, drop out all the sign stuff,
Pretty late,
all the comments that you just made, she'll put into a
so I have
document
to be,
so that you can look at.
I was in 25
At the
minutes.
December meeting, you will take a vote That is,
Good job.
yes, these are the changes
job.
we wanna move forward to town meeting. Those will go to your January meeting for a public hearing. After you do the public hearing, you take one more vote that says, yes, these are the final changes. And that's what goes on the warrant.
Okay.
Now, because it's January 12th, you've gotta give an up or down vote at the January meeting. You won't be able to make any changes to the language that you decide on in December.
Okay. Well,
It's good.
seeing as how the hour is late, I don't know if, I wanna get into the shared parking discussion. And nor the phased
Unless you're catering
subdivision
lunch.
review. No. Does the town core group have any?
We actually did not meet, we're waiting on the, results from the TAP application,
Okay,
so that's my report.
thank you for the short report.
Oh,
Any
Uh-oh.
communications, Mary? Bill?
Terry, I appreciate everybody's been here a long time, but I did come specifically for the old business of phase subdivision.
Mm-hmm.
Is that something that
I can read
briefly
through
be
quick-
discussed?
I can read through quickly if everybody wants to sit. It's one page. Everybody has a copy of it. And I will suggest that, what I will do is I'm gonna suggest that we adopt this into the regulations, but we don't necessarily have to do it now. But if the board, agrees with it, then Bill, I can present you with the written setup that you want. And, we can move on to the next meeting if we decide to adopt it or something like that. But, this all came about, is the board willing to hear it? This came about as a result of a letter written by Waterville Company relative to the Green Peak subdivision. Waterville Company had presented the Green Peak subdivision to the board with it in mind, apparently, that it was a phased subdivision. I don't think the board really understood what that was all about, but went through the process, and at the end, the two entities had different ideas of what had been obtained. So, looking at the zoning ordinance, the regulations for subdivision, with regard to that paragraph, I think it's section 7 or something like that, but it has to do with partial or phased subdivisions. And reading through it, it just seemed like there was a little bit left to be desired with regard to explanation. So I'm, the letter from Waterville Company had asked for an explanation of what the board's thoughts were on what was required to accomplish a phase subdivision. So I went through it and developed this draft as to what I think fills in the blanks of perhaps what what's missing in the regulations now. So I'll just read down through it. The phrase phased or partial subdivisions refers to the process by which an applicant, rather than a single subdivision approval for an entire project parcel, may seek multiple individual subdivision approvals for partial areas within that parcel, in step called phases, toward achieving the subdivision approval for all such partial areas making up the entire parcel. This can be accomplished in the following manner. The applicant shall submit the subdivision application for the entire project parcel in accordance with Article 5 of the Town of Waterville Valley subdivision regulations. If the subdivision approval of other than the entire project parcel as a whole is sought, the applicant or the application shall include at the beginning of the documents the statement that the applicant requests a review of the subdivision application for this project by the phased or partial subdivision process in accordance with Article 5, paragraph F, and agrees that, reference to Article 6, paragraph D, the time for action of each final plat submittal, with the exception of the initial final plat, be extended to 35 days from the date of its submittal. And the reason I say this is there could be quite a bit of time lapsed between the Phase 1 final plat submittal and the Phase 2 final plat submittal and so on, and there could be new board members or, you know, loss of memory, they really should have some time to review the entire parcel again, especially if the final plat includes some changes, which it probably would. The application process shall proceed for the entire project parcel in accordance with Article 5. The application shall clearly indicate the boundaries of each partial area within the project parcel intended for the individual subdivision approval, identifying each as a phase, with a phase number assigned chronologically in the order for which each approval will be sought. On completion of the planning board review for the entire project, the applicant shall submit in accordance with Article 6, Section C, the initial final plat, which shall be for the partial area defined as Phase 1. The initial final plat shall be given final consideration by the planning board, who shall act in accordance with Article 6, Section C, Paragraph 2. That's the time limitation. When subsequent subdivision approval for further phases is sought, the applicant shall submit to the planning board at one of its regularly scheduled meetings, in accordance with Article 6, Section C, a final plat for each such phase. Each subsequent final plat submittal shall be accompanied by either of these statements as applicable. This final plat complies with the requirements of Article 6, Section C without exception, or this final plat complies with the requirements of Article 6, Section C with the following exceptions, which involve changes to the previously submitted subdivision application for this project. And that should be followed by a list of each change specifically made, so that the planning board knows where they left off and what the changes would be. Each subsequent final plat shall be given final consideration by the planning board, who shall act on it in accordance with Article 5, Section C, Paragraph 2, within 35 days of the submittal of that final plat. And the above procedures consider subdivision approval only in the case of non-residential, multi-residential development improvements. Site plan approval is still required, also required. Did you follow that, Bill?
No.
Yeah.
It'd be nice to get a copy of it.
Yeah, I need to get a copy of that. But I would suggest that this fills in the blanks of what is intended by the partial or phased subdivision, and that we adopt it as part of the regulations. The only thing I think that is left up to discussion would be the time for review. The way this works is when the applicant submits the entire project at the beginning, it starts the clock. When the application is accepted, it starts the clock running. We have 65 days to approve a subdivision. Now, if the final plat for only one portion is submitted, you have to restart that clock again, because you don't want to have the time run out. Number one, the time runs out automatically if there's not any extension allotted by the applicant at that particular point in time. And number two, if a significant amount of time passes, the board is going to need almost the whole amount of time again to review the whole subdivision and the second or third or fourth final plat that's submitted at that time. I put 35 days, thinking that I'm trying to a little bit of a compromise to help the developer, be reasonable as we can be. But it's possible that the board might think 65 days, as if the clock were to start again on a whole subdivision, would be required. So
Now,
we'll open that to discussion.
This draft is dealing with just subdivision approval or subdivision and site plan approval?
Simply subdivision approval. The reason I say that is there is a paragraph in the subdivision regulations that is called partial or phased subdivision.
Subdivision.
Yes.
Right.
And there is nothing in the site plan that I've come across, unless you're familiar with it, Bill. Site plan regulations that deals with phased site plan.
Okay. So, but subdivision basically just deals with how they plan to divide the land up, right?
That's correct, yeah. But that's because the reason it's phased is it's put in with portions of the parcel being subdivided each time with the plat plan that is submitted at that particular time.
And that's from a land a little bit of flexibility on the land ownership and the assessing and tax ramifications and all that, it allows the developer to develop an entire parcel, but then choose to only do certain sections within a given time frame,
Yeah, what it
without
basically-
encumbering the whole thing.
Yeah, oftentimes, banks or whatever,
Right.
there
Yeah.
are reasons why a developer can't develop a whole,
Right.
large project.
Mhm.
But the planning board does like to see the whole project because of the way it will eventually turn out to be. So when the final plat, which is the second part, or the second plan, the final plan is to be submitted by the developer, has to be in a form that's acceptable to the, registry of deeds. And that is why, that second one is required.
Here's the question I have though. In order to review the entire proposal, isn't it necessary to submit the site plan for each of the phases?
Yes, and the original application is for the entire project, which would include the site development for the entire project.
Okay, so I think we should be clear about that what we're granting is just the approval for subdivision. But in order to do that, you gotta review, at least on paper, the site plan for the entire project, right?
Yes, well, I think right here, it says applicant shall submit the subdivision application for the entire, for the project parcel, the entire project parcel, I interpose the words there, in accordance with Article 5 Town of Valley subdivision regulations.
And that would imply that site
covers
plan
the
would
whole
be
thing.
part of that,
Exactly.
okay, all right. I don't have any, as long as it's clear that, you know, if we don't have the buildings, walkways, roadways, and everything outlined, it's gonna be pretty difficult to approve the phase subdivision.
Basically, the application, you wouldn't know the difference, and the initial application would be for the whole subdivision as if it were an entire subdivision, with all the information you're
But
requesting.
what you're, just all the approval is for the subsequent phasing. He
Your
doesn't
approval-
actually have approval for the subsequent site plan.
No,
Alright.
this is a process that, what you end up with is individual subdivision approvals that will add up in the end to what the entire project is.
Okay?
You have boundaries for each individual
Yeah.
lot.
Each individual phase will have boundaries, because it has to go in the final plat form to the registry of deeds. So it will have meets and bounds.
And the site plan would be for all of it combined?
The site plan would be I haven't really dealt with the site plan. This was, amounts to the subdivision. This was to address the issue of the subdivision. The site plan would be, it could be developed in phases without the plat plan, really.
I
guess
think
what I'm
that
thinking-
it would seem to me that, our regulations kind of say this, that subdivision and site plan frequently interchange and the regulations co-apply. But in order to say, okay, we approve this four phases of development, we would have to know what the entire site plan looked like, and in effect, we're approving the entire site plan. Assuming you didn't make any changes, if you walked into the next meeting and said, well, phase 2, I've made no changes, we've approved that site plan as well. I don't think we would go, we could go through and vote again, but you know, if we've approved it once, why would we wanna say, well, you gotta
I think the entire site plan could be approved initially.
okay.
I guess
Except,
what I'm saying is, you got X number of lots that are gonna be subdivided. And you've got boundaries for X number of lots. When you look at the site plan may not be compliant until you remove some of those boundaries.
well, that's another issue, yeah, I agree.
Because the setbacks,
Cause the
Well,
setbacks
based on
could change
removing those
if you
lines.
start combining the lines.
you know, I see that as kind of a, how do you handle that?
Well, I would think that, you know, just my personal opinion, that if he came in and said, look, I wanna develop this in 4 phases, alright? Here's my entire plan for the whole thing, here's what the buildings look like, roadways, and the planning board said, great, we approve that. And all I wanna build right now is phase 1. And then if we say, okay, phase 1, if that's all that gets built, it's still compliant. Okay, well, you know, go ahead. When he gets down to phase 2, where he's gonna now combine the lot lines, I'd give him the ability to you know, the phase submission of the site plan would assume that we're gonna grant that, or maybe we have as part of that if he makes no changes, these lots are gonna combine, therefore the setbacks are a little bit different on the next phase, that would be acceptable to me, personally. I don't know what, did I make any sense?
I think the only other one that I can remember is Forest Road, was the phase development. But I
don't
think that
remember
was
it.
all one
Yeah.
lot.
Yeah,
It's these
But-
individual lots that kind of present a little.
Terry, I don't think that's a problem, because I think somewhere in here, you just need to say that every phase or phases as they're combined must be able to stand on its own relative to setback requirements. You
Well,
don't ever wanna create a lot
assuming,
that's in
assuming
violation
that,
of
right,
setback.
assuming that the lines got combined, I would
Right.
give you
You'd
the
merge
ability where
lots.
they join,
As
to
it happens,
merge the
you'd
lots
merge 'em.
again, right. You know, and so that's a different setback than each one has to stand on its own.
Right, but
Okay.
but every combined,
Right,
phases combined together must stay
right,
in there.
you must, right, you're gonna run the same problem,
But
right?
what the developer is trying to avoid, from what I understand, is having to come in and submit a full set of plans, architectural plans and all, for every phase. But for the site plan, now, I think it's pretty straightforward with regard to the subdivision plan, because it just amounts to, well, come in, give me the final plat for the subdivision, and we'll go from there. But as far as the site plan is concerned, you brought up a good point, because it's almost as if you have to consider every phase as an individual phase in the beginning, right at the very beginning.
Right.
And the configuration could be quite different in each one. But it doesn't really, you'd have to somehow tie it into the site plan, because the site regulations don't really deal with it, from what I gather, from what I can see.
No, I don't, I think the regulations, we're gonna have to get into a statement along the lines of what Bill just said, which is that at the point in time that you combine, the combined setbacks now apply, but if you're on 2 or 4, the boundaries must still comply as it stands alone. So that the edges would have, can't assume that 3 is gonna get built. But once you decide to add 3, you don't have to treat it as a separate lot. They're allowed to combine the line and get it closer, because that's what we want.
Each phase would have to go to the registry of deeds, right?
That's
I
just
don't
for
know
the
how you
just
do
for the
that.
subdivision,
That's a whole nother
Right,
issue.
you're right.
but not for the
No.
site plan.
That's
Site plan
a
goes
whole
to the
nother
registry.
matter.
Yeah, I think the subdivision, I think this covers the situation of the subdivision with regard to registry and what would be required of the developer and the final plat. But the idea of the subdivision the site plan kinda complicates it. So, my question is, if the applicant came with the site plan application originally, the same, right along with the subdivision application for the entire parcel, would you you review the whole site plan, which is a separate entity, and what would you end up with? What would you approve in the end? Would you approve the entire project, or would you say because you're only requesting subdivision phase one, then we will only approve site plan phase one?
I think if we had the information, we could approve the entire project, subject to, as you stated here, and unless something changes, which in all likelihood it will.
Yeah.
You know, which means you're back to having to resubmit again, but if there are no changes, and we originally looked at it and approved it all, you
Just
just
move on to the next
notify
step.
us, you're going from one, I'm gonna execute two. Well,
But it would have to be clear in the application, in the initial application, how the site plan is going to work with the different phases of the subdivision.
I would think there'd be no way to avoid, you'd have to submit a site plan for the entire thing. Enough, because if you can't figure out where the roads are, I don't see how you can approve the subdivision, right?
Right.
No, site plan has more to do with architectural renderings, landscaping. Do you have a
Okay,
two-car
that's a good
garage or a
point,
one-car garage? You know, the roads are all in there, that engineering's all done. I mean, that's.
Well, maybe, it would be enough, in order to approve the entire subdivision in phases, we'd have to have enough information to say, yeah, it works.
I think I could do that, or somebody could do that. Can I ask you a question? Does this say that after you get, the first final approval for phase one, that subsequent approvals have to happen within 35 days?
No.
Oh, that's,
Where are you reading that?
Yeah, when I
that's
first
in
read
the
it, that's
second,
what I thought
that's
it
in the
said.
second bullet.
Okay, time for, okay, subdivisions, where is it? The applicant requests review of subdivision application for this property in phased or partial subdivision process in accordance with Article 5F, and agrees that, reference to Article 5.6D, the time for action on each final plat submittal, with the exception of the initial final plat, be extended to 35 days from the date of submittal. So when that final plat is submitted, the board has 35 days to act.
Oh, okay. Did this deal with, you know, whether it's 35 or your typical 65, I don't think that's a big deal. I think the question that we discussed last month is, how long, you go in and you do the completed application for the whole thing, you get final approval for phase one. How long can you go before you come in with phase two? And what happens if there've been changes in regulations since you got the approval of the completed application?
Okay, that's right, I meant to bring that up today too. Yeah, it doesn't address that, and it's a good question. If phase, I guess I would say that if phase one, his question is, phase one of the subdivision, let's just stick with the subdivision for the time being for discussion purposes. The plat for phase one is submitted and approved. 2 years later, the applicant comes in with the final plat for phase two, submits it to the board without changes. But in that 2-year interim, the regulations have been changed. Now, I guess if there's no changes, even though the regulations have been changed, I think the approval would go ahead based on what the initial review was. However, if the second final plat was submitted with changes, then I would think that the new regulations would have to, they'd have to rule.
Yeah, I don't know, I think you've made a great step forward there, Terry. I'd suggest that maybe have it reviewed by by Tara and the town attorney. I mean, phase subdivisions are not unique to Waterville Valley,
Right.
and they deal with it all the time, but I would ask them to put in their 2 cents, but I think you've made a good step in the right direction.
Yeah, I think I would have them go over it before I would get it adopted, but this is the first time it's been presented to the board, so.
And I would suggest that we get down to 3 members, so
Yeah,
you might wanna, I think the whole board should hear this discussion.
and in the meantime, I can think about that site plan stuff.
Yeah, and site plan's gonna be critical to this
Yeah,
Well, I'm a little I'm just not clear on what is part of a subdivision application versus a site plan application. But I would agree with Bill, we don't need the architectural details, but we would need to roughly know locations of buildings, setbacks, envelopes, roads, or otherwise, it's gonna be hard to say, boy, that whole thing looks pretty good.
yeah, because I agree with you when you made that point, everyone has to stand alone.
Right.
It happens quite often that a phase one or phase two will get done, and then that's the end of it.
Right,
And you
now
have to
you
make
got a
sure it's all
building that's
closed
not
out, exactly.
conforming to the setback.
So in that respect, you'd almost have to see this site plan done in consecutive phases that correspond to the subdivision plan. Well, I don't think we can take any action on this today. Bill, if you allow another month before I get you that written answer.
I might not be here, but you can always send me a copy and I'll give you my input.
But I think it's important that we address it, so it's good that you brought it up. It's good that we get it into the.
Well, I appreciate you doing that, and thank everybody for taking a few extra minutes to stand and look at it.
Okay. I think, Mary, did I ask you?
Yeah, there's nothing.
Nothing, good, thank you. Okay, now I'll accept the motion to.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Second? All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Okay, thank you for.